I've been invisible my entire life, the forgotten daughter, the shadow sister who smiled through every slight, every stolen moment, every erased achievement. But tonight, my 36th birthday, I finally understood why. When my sister stood up at my party and announced her wedding date, the room erupted in applause. My mother beamed. My relatives rushed to congratulate her. And me, I might as well have been a ghost at my own celebration. What they didn't know was that her fiancé used to be mine. 4 years ago, he vanished without explanation, and now I knew exactly why. What they didn't know was that my mother had been stealing from me for years, manipulating wills, rewriting history, erasing my father's final wishes. What they didn't know was that I had spent the last week gathering every email, every video, every piece of evidence that would shatter their perfect family illusion. So when my sister finished her speech, I stood up. I opened my laptop, and I showed them who the real bride was, the bride of lies, manipulation, and decades of calculated cruelty. By the time I was done, my sister was on her knees. My mother couldn't speak. And I was finally free. This is the story of how I stopped being silent. My name is Leah Cunningham. I'm 36 years old, and for the past 8 years, I've been working as a financial analyst in Seattle, far enough from my family that I could breathe close enough that I couldn't use distance as an excuse for why we'd grown apart. The truth is, I'd needed that space. Growing up as the invisible daughter teaches you that sometimes survival means putting miles between yourself and the people who should love you most. But this time, I was coming home. My birthday was in a week, and despite everything, some small, foolish part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Maybe my mother would finally see me. Maybe my sister Emily would treat me like family instead of competition. Maybe we could be the kind of people who actually celebrated each other instead of keeping score. I was packing my suitcase when the photograph slipped out from between two sweaters and landed face up on my bedroom floor. I froze. The image was 4 years old, me, standing outside a coffee shop laughing at something the man beside me had said. His face was slightly blurred, caught mid-turn, but I remembered exactly who he was. Mark Chen, the first man who'd ever made me feel like I wasn't invisible, like my thoughts mattered, like I was worth pursuing. And then, one day, without explanation, he simply vanished. No calls returned, no texts answered. Just gone, like I'd imagined the whole thing. I picked up the photo and studied it for a long moment before tucking it into the bottom of my suitcase. Some ghosts I thought should stay buried. The drive home took 6 hours. By the time I pulled into my mother's driveway, the sun was setting behind the house I'd grown up in, a pristine colonial with perfect landscaping that had always felt more like a museum than a home. My mother opened the door before I could knock her smile warm, but somehow not reaching her eyes. "Leah, you're finally here. Emily's been so excited to see you." I doubted that, but I smiled anyway. "It's good to be home, Mum." Dinner that night should have been my first warning. The table was set for 4 Mum Emily's mysterious fiancé, who apparently couldn't make it tonight, and me. My mother spent the entire meal recounting Emily's recent promotion at work, her new apartment, her engagement to such a wonderful man. Every sentence was a spotlight on Emily, and I sat in the shadows where I'd always been nodding and smiling and pretending it didn't sting. "And what about you, Leah?" my mother finally asked, almost as an afterthought. "Still doing. What was it again?" "Something with numbers." "Financial analysis," I said quietly. "Same as the last 8 years." "Oh, that's nice, dear." She turned immediately back to Emily. "Now, about the wedding venue." I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion from the drive. Nobody protested, but as I was heading upstairs, my phone rang. Unknown number, Seattle area code. "Ms. Cunningham, this is Richard Morrison from Morrison & Associates. I'm the attorney handling your grandfather's estate. I need to discuss something rather urgent regarding the will." My grandfather had passed away 6 months ago. I'd assumed everything was settled. What kind of urgent? There's a specific clause in the will that pertains to you. Your grandfather left you 60% of his estate, approximately 2.3 million in assets. However, there's an attendance requirement. You must be present at a family meeting on the 8th day of your visit home. That would be your birthday, I believe. The meeting is scheduled for 3 p.m. If you're not present, or if you leave the property before the meeting concludes, your share transfers entirely to your sister Emily. The room tilted slightly. $2.3 million. Yes, your grandfather was very specific about the terms. He wanted to ensure you were valued by your family. I'll see you at 3 p.m. on the 8th. Don't be late, Ms. Cunningham. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, my mind racing. That's when I heard voices drifting up from downstairs. Emily's laugh, bright and sharp. My mother's voice, lower and conspiratorial. I crept to the top of the stairs, staying in the shadows. Old habits die hard. So the plan is set for her birthday, Emily was saying. The announcement at brunch will definitely push her buttons. My mother's response was quiet, but I caught the edge of it. Just make it uncomfortable enough. She never could handle being the centre of attention, especially when it's negative. Emily laughed again. Trust me, Mum, by the time we're done, she'll be so humiliated she'll leave before lunch. And then... Her voice dropped to a whisper, but the words cut through the darkness like a knife. If she walks out before the meeting, I get everything right. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling, replaying Emily's words over and over, until they lost meaning and became just sounds. But the intention behind them remained crystal clear. They were going to humiliate me. Systematically, deliberately, and my own mother was helping plan it. By the time dawnlight crept through my window, I'd made a decision. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of running away. Whatever they had planned, I would endure it. I'd smile through their cruelty the way I always had, and at 3 o'clock on my birthday, I'd be sitting in that meeting room when the lawyer arrived. They wanted my inheritance. They'd have to work harder than petty humiliation to take it from me. I came downstairs the next morning to find Emily already at the kitchen table surrounded by bridal magazines. Like a queen holding court, she barely glanced up when I entered. Morning, I said, pouring myself coffee. She turned a glossy page featuring an elaborate flower arrangement. Mum and I were thinking, since everyone's already going to be here for your birthday anyway, it would be the perfect time for me to make my big announcement. You know about the wedding, kill 2 birds with 1 stone. The coffee tasted bitter on my tongue. My birthday party, you want to announce your engagement at my birthday party? Well, it's not like you're doing anything special with it. Emily's tone was light, almost teasing, but there was steel underneath. You never make a big deal about your birthday, and everyone will be so excited to hear about Mark and me. It'll make the whole event more memorable. Mark. The name hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Your fiancé's name is Mark. Mark Chen. He's amazing. You'll love him. She said it so casually, as if the name couldn't possibly mean anything to me. As if there was no way her Mark could be my Mark from 4 years ago. But I knew better than to believe in coincidences. Not in this family. My mother swept into the kitchen at that moment, already dressed and made up despite the early hour. Oh, good, you're both up. Leah, honey, I was thinking we should go over the menu for your party. Nothing too extravagant, of course. We want to save room for the real excitement. She smiled at Emily, who beamed back. Mum already said it's fine, Emily interjected. The announcement, I mean, she thinks it's a great idea. My mother nodded, not even looking at me. Leah won't mind. She never does. There it was, the casual dismissal that had defined my entire childhood delivered with such certainty that it didn't even occur to her to ask if I actually minded. I was simply expected to accommodate, to shrink, to make room for Emily's light to shine brighter. I took a slow sip of coffee, buying time to control my voice. Of course, whatever makes everyone happy. My mother patted my hand absently, already moving on to discuss flower arrangements with Emily. I might as well have been furniture. Later that morning, while Emily was out picking up more wedding magazines, apparently the dozen on the table weren't enough. My mother and I were alone in the kitchen. She was arranging fruit in a bowl with the same meticulous attention she'd always given to appearances over substance. "You know," she said, suddenly not looking at me, "you used to have someone pursuing you quite seriously. Do you remember that nice young man who used to take you to coffee? What was his name again?" My hand stilled over the dish I was washing. She knew exactly what his name was. This wasn't casual conversation. This was reconnaissance. "That was a long time ago," I said carefully. "Yes, but he disappeared so suddenly." "Left town, I heard. You never talked about it. You never talk about much of anything, really." She glanced at me, then her expression unreadable. "He just vanished and you acted like nothing had happened, like he'd never existed at all." The water ran hot over my hands, but I didn't move them. "People leave sometimes. It's not always a story." My mother arranged another piece of fruit with surgical precision. "Well, I'm glad Emily found someone reliable. Mark seems very committed to her, very devoted." The implication hung in the air between us. She was telling me something without saying it directly. She was preparing me, or warning me, or maybe just twisting the knife before the real pain began. I wanted to ask her why. Why she'd always chosen Emily over me. Why my achievements were met with faint praise while Emily's smallest accomplishments were celebrated like miracles. Why, even now when I'd built a successful career and life on my own, I was still just the backdrop to Emily's starring role. But I already knew the answer. Some mothers have favourites. Some families have golden children and scapegoats, and once those roles are assigned, they're almost impossible to escape. "I'm happy for Emily," I said instead, and hated how hollow the word sounded. The rest of the week passed in a surreal blur. Emily transformed the house into what I privately called Wedding Central. Fabric swatches appeared on every surface. She spent hours on phone calls with caterers and florists discussing her vision for a ceremony that wouldn't happen for another year but apparently required immediate and constant attention. She modelled potential bridesmaid dresses in the living room. She debated invitation fonts at the dinner table. And through it all, my birthday, the supposed reason for this family gathering, became an afterthought. An inconvenient formality that had to be acknowledged before everyone could focus on what really mattered: Emily's happiness. I watched it happen with a strange detachment, like I was observing someone else's life. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand attention, to insist that for once, just once, I be allowed to matter. But the larger part of me, the part that had learnt survival through invisibility, simply observed and waited. I kept thinking about the inheritance. $2.3 million. My grandfather had left me that money with specific conditions. And now I understood why. He'd known. Somehow he'd seen what my mother was, what this family dynamic was, and he'd tried to protect me. The attendance clause wasn't just about showing up. It was a test. Could I withstand their cruelty long enough to claim what was rightfully mine? On the 7th day, I was reading in the living room when the doorbell rang. Emily, who'd been upstairs, came thundering down the stairs with an enthusiasm I'd never seen directed at my arrival. He's here!" she squealed, practically vibrating with excitement. My mother emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face already arranged in a welcoming smile for the man who'd won Emily's heart. I stood slowly, my book forgotten on the couch. Something cold was spreading through my chest, a premonition I couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Emily flung open the door, launching herself at the man on the porch. Over her shoulder, as she pulled back from their embrace, I saw his face. Mark Chen, 4 years older, same warm brown eyes, same slight smile. The man who disappeared without a word was standing in my mother's doorway with his arm around my sister's waist. And when his eyes met mine over Emily's head, I saw the exact moment he recognised me. His face went pale. His smile froze. For one long, terrible second, We just stared at each other while Emily chattered on, oblivious. "Mark, this is my sister Leah," Emily said, turning to beam at me. "The one I've told you so much about." Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand frozen in my mother's living room while my past and present collided with devastating force. Emily's voice cut through the roaring in my ears. "Leah, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." If she only knew how accurate that description was. I forced my lungs to work, dragging in air that felt too thick to breathe. "I'm fine, just a headache. The drive yesterday, I think." It was the weakest lie I'd ever told, but Emily wasn't paying attention to me anyway. She'd already turned back to Mark, her hand possessively wrapped around his arm. "Isn't she sweet? Always so quiet and thoughtful. Total opposite of me, right, babe?" Mark's eyes were still locked on mine, and I watched emotions flicker across his face too quickly to name. Shock, recognition, something that might have been regret, or might have been fear. His mouth opened again like a fish drowning in air. "Yeah," he finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Total opposite." My mother materialized beside me, and I hadn't even noticed her moving. She placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch somehow both concerned and dismissive. "Why don't you go lie down, honey? We'll manage down here. Mark and Emily have so much to catch up on." She was giving me permission to flee, and we both knew it. The invisible daughter could disappear again, retreat to her room, while the golden child basked in attention. It was the role I'd played my entire life. But something stopped me from taking the escape route. Maybe it was the inheritance hanging in the balance. Maybe it was the way Mark looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. Maybe it was simply that I was tired of running. "Actually, I'd love to get to know Mark better," I heard myself say. My voice sounded strange, distant, like it belonged to someone braver than me. "Since he's going to be family." Emily beamed, completely missing the tension crackling through the room. "That's so sweet. Isn't she sweet? Mark, come on, let's all sit down. I want to show you both the venue options." Mark moved like a man walking to his execution. He sat on the sofa across from me, carefully positioning Emily between us like a human shield. His hands were clasped so tightly in his lap that his knuckles had gone white. I studied him as Emily spread glossy brochures across the coffee table. He'd aged in 4 years, but wow. There were fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his hair was slightly shorter. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, professional, put-together, successful. Everything about his appearance said he'd moved on, built a life, become someone new. But his eyes kept darting to mine when he thought Emily wasn't looking. And in those brief glances, I saw the same man who'd sat across from me in coffee shops, who'd listened to me talk about my family with an intensity that had made me feel for the first time in my life truly heard. "So Mark," my mother said, settling into her chair with the bearing of a queen granting an audience, "Emily tells us you work in tech, software development, project management." Mark corrected, his voice steadier now. "I oversee development teams for a cybersecurity firm." "And how did you two meet?" I asked. The question came out sharper than I'd intended, edged with something that made Emily glance at me curiously. "At a conference in Boston," Emily answered before Mark could. 6 months ago, I was presenting on business strategy and Mark was in the audience. He came up to me afterward and said my presentation was the most insightful thing he'd heard all weekend. She gazed at him adoringly. I thought he was just flattering me, but he asked me to dinner and we talked for hours. 6 months ago. The timeline calcified in my mind. Mark had been gone from my life for 4 years, and then 6 months ago he'd appeared in Emily's orbit. Not randomly, not coincidentally, deliberately. "That's quite romantic," my mother said warmly. "And now, here you are engaged. Such a whirlwind." "When you know," Emily said, flashing her ring. "Right, babe." Mark finally spoke directly to me, and his voice carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite identify. "Sometimes things happen faster than you expect. Sometimes you don't get to choose the timing. Our eyes locked, and for a moment it was just the two of us in that room. I was back in his car 4 years ago listening to him say, "There's something I need to tell you about your family," watching his face go pale at whatever he'd heard on that phone call. "There's something I need to tell you about your family." The memory hit me with physical force. That's what he'd been trying to say. He'd known something about my mother, about Emily, and then he'd vanished. And now he was here, engaged to the sister he'd been trying to warn me about. "Leah." Emily was looking at me with concern that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're spacing out again. Are you sure you're okay?" I stood abruptly, my legs unsteady beneath me. "I need some air. Excuse me." I didn't wait for permission. I walked out of that living room with as much dignity as I could muster, feeling Mark's eyes on my back the entire way. I made it to the kitchen through the back door onto the porch where I'd played as a child, and learned that some daughters are loved more than others. My hands were shaking. I gripped the porch railing, staring out at the perfectly manicured backyard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Mark was engaged to Emily. Mark who'd cared about me, or at least I'd thought he had. Mark who'd tried to tell me something important about my family before disappearing into thin air. Had Emily known about us? Had she somehow found out and pursued Mark specifically to hurt me? But that seemed impossible. Emily could be selfish and cruel, but this level of calculation was something else entirely. Unless I'd never really known my sister at all. The back door opened behind me. I didn't turn around, assuming it was my mother coming to scold me for being rude to their guest. "Leah," Mark's voice low and urgent. "Please, I can explain." I whirled around. He stood in the doorway, alone, his expression anguished. In the late afternoon light, I could see the guilt written across every feature of his face. "Explain what—" My voice was steadier than I felt. "Explain how you pursued me 4 years ago and then vanished. Explain how you're now engaged to my sister. Explain why you're pretending we never met." "I didn't have a choice," he said, stepping onto the porch and pulling the door closed behind him. 4 years ago, He stopped, glancing back at the house nervously. "I can't talk here, they might hear." "Then why did you follow me out here?" "Because I needed to see if you were okay. When I saw you standing there, I thought I was going to be sick." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered too well. "I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe that." "I don't have to believe anything," I said coldly. "You don't get to disappear for 4 years and then show up engaged to my sister and expect understanding. I know how this looks, but Leah, you're in danger. Your sister, your mother, they're planning something. That's what I was trying to tell you 4 years ago before—" He cut himself off, looking back at the house again. "Before what? Before you got a phone call and decided I wasn't worth the trouble." Pain flashed across his face. "It wasn't like that. The call was from Emily. She knew about us. She had proof of something about me, something that could have destroyed my career. She told me if I didn't leave you alone and disappear completely, she'd release it." My blood went cold. "What kind of proof?" "It doesn't matter anymore. It was fake, but I didn't know that then. She'd doctored emails to make it look like I'd harassed a colleague. She threatened to send them to my boss, to the press. She said she'd ruin me." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I was a coward. I should have fought her. I should have told you, but I was terrified and I ran." "And now you're engaged to her." The words tasted bitter. "How does that work exactly? She blackmailed you 4 years ago, so you decided to marry her." "It's complicated." He looked away, jaw tight. "She found me again 6 months ago. She has leverage, new leverage, and this time she made it clear that if I didn't play along, she wouldn't just destroy my career. She'd destroy yours too." The porch tilted beneath my feet. "What are you talking about?" "I'll explain everything, but not here, not now." He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly. "I'm sending you a number. Text me. We need to meet somewhere they won't see us." Before I could respond, Emily's voice called out from inside the house. "Mark, where did you go?" He squeezed my arm once quickly, a gesture that carried the weight of everything unsaid between us. Please, Leah, trust me one more time. I know I don't deserve it, but you need to know the truth about what's happening. Then he was gone back through the door, back to Emily and her wedding plans, and the elaborate performance of their engagement. I stood alone on the porch, my mind reeling. Emily had blackmailed Mark 4 years ago to keep him away from me. She'd found him again 6 months ago and forced him into this engagement. And now, Mark was claiming Emily was planning to destroy not just him, but me too. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands. Unknown number, Seattle area code. The message was short: we need to talk. Alone, please. M. I stared at those words until they blurred. Mark wanted to talk. Mark, who'd had 4 years to explain himself and had chosen silence instead. Mark, who claimed Emily had blackmailed him but had still shown up at my mother's door with a ring on her finger. Every instinct screamed at me to delete the message, to ignore him the way he'd ignored me, to protect myself from whatever fresh hurt he was about to deliver. But underneath the hurt and anger, a cold logic was taking shape. Mark had tried to warn me about my family 4 years ago. Now he was back, claiming Emily was dangerous. And I'd just overheard my sister and mother plotting to make me leave before I could claim my inheritance. This wasn't about romance or second chances. This was about survival. And Mark Chen, whatever else he was, might be the only person who could tell me what I was really up against. I typed back 3 words, tomorrow morning, where his response came within seconds. Riverside Coffee, 7 a.m, park 2 blocks away. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face on that porch, the guilt, the fear, the desperate urgency in his voice. Emily had blackmailed him. She'd manufactured evidence to drive him away from me 4 years ago. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but somehow not surprising. I'd spent my entire life watching Emily take what she wanted without consequence. Why should my relationships be any different? But something about Mark's story didn't add up. He'd claimed Emily had new leverage, now something that kept him trapped in this engagement. What could possibly be so damaging that he'd agree to marry someone who'd already proven herself capable of destroying him? And why had he looked so panicked when he'd mentioned that she could hurt my career too? I left the house at 6:30 before anyone else was awake. The coffee shop Mark had chosen was in the old part of town, the kind of place that opened early for construction workers and insomniacs. I parked where he'd instructed and walked the 2 blocks, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was already there, sitting in a corner booth with his back to the wall like he was expecting an ambush. He looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his eyes and his jaw was rough with stubble. When he saw me, something flickered across his face, relief mixed with something darker. I slid into the booth across from him without a word. A waitress appeared with coffee, blessedly giving us a moment before we had to speak. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and waited. 4 years ago. Mark began, his voice low and hoarse. I didn't ghost you by choice. I need you to understand that first. What we had, what I thought we had, it was real, at least for me. The past tense stung more than I wanted to admit. Then, why did you leave? Emily. He said her name like it tasted bitter. 3 days after that phone call, I mentioned the one I took in my car when I was trying to tell you something important. She showed up at my apartment. I didn't even know who she was at first. She introduced herself as, your sister said she needed to talk to me about you. I felt my grip tighten on the coffee mug. What did she say? She had screenshots, text messages between you and your friends. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through old photos, and turned the screen toward me. She showed me these. I looked at the images, my stomach dropping. They were text conversations, allegedly from my phone number, discussing Mark with friends I'd lost touch with years ago. The messages were cruel and dismissive. He's sweet, but kind of pathetic. like a puppy following me around. Another read, I feel bad, but honestly, these dates are charity work at this point. How do I let him down easy? The timestamps showed they'd been sent during the exact period Mark and I had been seeing each other. I never sent those, I whispered. Mark, I know that now. His voice was heavy with regret. But then I believed her. She seemed genuinely concerned, like she was trying to protect me from getting hurt. She said you'd always had a habit of stringing guys along, that you got some kind of validation from making men fall for you, and then pulling away. She told me you were laughing about me behind my back. The coffee tasted like acid. So you just disappeared, didn't even ask me about it. I was humiliated. He looked down at his hands. And young. And stupid. I convinced myself that all the signs had been there, that I'd just been too blind to see them. So I left. Changed my number, moved to a different part of the city, tried to forget you existed. And now you're engaged to her. The words came out flat, emotionless. The woman who lied to you and destroyed what we had. How does that make any sense? Mark's jaw clenched. 6 months ago, I was at a tech conference in Boston. Emily was there giving a presentation. I recognized her immediately, but she acted like she'd never seen me before in her life. She was charming, professional, impressive. After her talk, she approached me, introduced herself like we were strangers. We had dinner. She asked about my work. My life seemed genuinely interested. She was playing you, I said. Again. I know that now, but she's good at it, Leah, really good. She made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt since... He stopped himself, but we both knew how that sentence ended. Since you. We started dating. Long distance at first, then more serious. I'd convinced myself that what happened 4 years ago was just a misunderstanding, that maybe you really had said those things and Emily had been trying to help. When did you find out the truth? 3 months ago. He leaned back against the booth, an exhaustion written across every line of his face. I was helping her set up a new phone, and I saw her email. She has a folder labelled insurance. Inside were templates for fake text message screenshots, Photoshop files, instructions on how to manipulate metadata, and there in a subfolder labelled Mark Chen Phase 1 were the original files she'd used to create those screenshots 4 years ago. The world tilted slightly. Phase 1. There was more than one phase. That's when I understood. She hadn't just stumbled across me in Boston. She'd been tracking me, waiting for the right moment, and when she found me again, she executed Phase 2, getting me to fall for her so completely that by the time I discovered the truth, I'd already proposed. His voice broke slightly. I confronted her. She didn't even deny it. She just smiled and told me that if I tried to leave or expose her, she'd destroy both of us. She has more than just doctored screenshots now, Leah. She has access to my work computer, my emails, my financial records. She's manufactured evidence that would make it look like I've been embezzling from my company for years. That's insane. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. It was exactly the kind of methodical cruelty Emily excelled at. Why didn't you go to the police? Surely they could prove the evidence was fake. Could they? She's a business strategist. She knows how to create paper trails that look legitimate. And even if I could prove my innocence, eventually the accusation alone would ruin me. My company works with government contracts. The investigation would destroy my career, my reputation, everything I've built. He looked at me with hollow eyes. And she didn't just threaten me. She threatened you, too. My blood went cold. What do you mean? She has something on you, or she claims she does. Something about financial irregularities at your company tied to your name. I don't know if it's real or fabricated, but she made it clear that if I don't marry her, she'll make sure you go down with me. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too close. This is insane. Why would she go through all this just to hurt me? I don't think it's about hurting you, not entirely. Mark leaned forward, his voice urgent now. I think it's about your grandfather's will. She knows about the inheritance, about the conditions. She's been planning this for months, maybe years. Getting me to propose, announcing the engagement at your birthday party, it's all calculated to make you leave before that meeting. And once you're gone, she gets everything. Before I could respond, Mark's phone erupted with sound. Multiple calls coming in rapid succession, all from the same number. Emily's name flashed across the screen again and again. His face went pale. She knows I'm not at the hotel, he said, standing abruptly. She's going to start tracking my location. I have to go. Wait! I reached across the table, grabbing his wrist. You haven't told me everything. What was it you were trying to tell me 4 years ago? What did you find out about my family? I can't. Not yet. Not until... Another call. His phone was ringing non-stop now. I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake. Mark, please. He pulled away from my grip, his eyes wild with something that looked like genuine fear. Just be careful at the party. Whatever they have planned, whatever Emily does, don't react. Don't give her what she wants. And whatever you do, don't leave before that meeting. Tell me what you know, I demanded, standing too. If Emily is planning something, I need to know what it is. I can't. If she finds out I warned you. He was backing toward the door now. I'm sorry, Leah, for all of it. I'm so sorry. And then he was gone, practically running out of the coffee shop, leaving me standing alone with more questions than answers, and the terrible certainty that whatever was coming, I wasn't ready for it. I drove back to the house in a daze, Mark's final words echoing in my head. Don't react. Don't give her what she wants. Don't leave before that meeting. He'd sounded terrified, and that fear was contagious. What exactly was Emily capable of? I'd spent 36 years thinking I knew my sister, spoiled, self-centered, manipulative, in the casual way of someone who'd always gotten what she wanted. But this was different. This was premeditated, systematic, the work of someone who'd been planning my downfall for months, maybe years. I needed to know what I was walking into. And if Emily was careless enough to leave evidence lying around, I needed to find it before she realised I was looking. The house was quiet when I slipped in through the front door. A note on the kitchen counter written in my mother's perfect cursive. Went dress shopping with Emily, back by 3, help yourself to lunch. I crumpled the note in my fist. Of course they'd gone shopping together. Of course I wasn't invited. The invisible daughter didn't get to participate in the golden child's wedding preparations. But their absence gave me something more valuable than inclusion time. I moved through the house like a ghost, checking each room to confirm I was truly alone. My mother's bedroom empty. Emily's childhood room, where she was staying, empty. The guest bathroom, the den, the sunroom, all empty. Just me and the heavy silence of a house that had never felt like home. The living room was exactly as we'd left it the night before, still cluttered with Emily's wedding magazines and fabric samples. And there on the coffee table, half hidden beneath a stack of venue brochures, was Emily's laptop, open. The screen had gone dark, but the power light glowed steadily. My heart hammered as I approached it. This was crossing a line. I knew that. But Emily had crossed so many lines already, fabricating evidence, blackmailing Mark, plotting to steal my inheritance. What was a little snooping compared to that? I tapped the trackpad, and the screen blazed to life. No password lock. Of course not. Emily had always been careless about security, confident that her charm was protection enough. The desktop was cluttered with folders, but one jumped out immediately. Birthday plan. Private. My hand hovered over the trackpad for only a second before I clicked. Inside were 3 documents. The first was titled Operation Disqualification, Master Timeline. I opened it, my breath catching as I scanned the contents. It was all there. Every detail of Emily's plan laid out with terrifying precision. Day 1 through day 7, each day had specific objectives. Day 4, M arrives, initial awkwardness planted. Day 5, casual mentions of L's romantic failures at dinner. Day 6. Increase wedding talk, monopolize all conversations. And then, day 8, my birthday, the day of the lawyers' meeting. The entry for that day was colour-coded in red and ran for 2 full pages. 10:00 a.m. Family brunch begins, keep atmosphere light initially. 10:45 a.m. E announces wedding date with elaborate presentation. Emphasize finally found true love narrative. 11:15 a.m. Mum makes toast about family pointedly, thanks everyone except Elle. 11:30 a.m. Aunt Sarah prepped, asks about Elle's love life. E responds with concerned sister routine. 11:45 a.m. Accidentally reveal M's past pursuit of Elle. Frame as Elle tried to sabotage our relationship. 12:00 p.m. Escalate. Multiple relatives express disappointment in Elle. Create hostile environment. 4:30 p.m. Elle reaches breaking point, leaves house in anger, humiliation. 3:00 p.m. Lawyer arrives, Elle absent. Inheritance transfers to E per grandfather's terms. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the laptop steady. Every moment of my birthday had been choreographed like a play with me as the unwitting star of my own humiliation. They'd even coordinated with relatives planting people to attack me at specific times. The second document was titled Talking Points and Scripts. I opened it and felt bile rise in my throat. There were actual scripts lines for my mother to deliver questions for aunts and uncles, to ask even Emily's spontaneous speech about finding love with Mark. Nothing was real. Nothing was genuine. It was all performance designed to break me. I grabbed my phone and started photographing everything. Every page, every detail, every damning piece of evidence. The camera shutter clicked rapidly as I worked my movements frantic now. I didn't know how much time I had before they returned. The third document was labelled Contingency Plans. If L doesn't break. I opened it with trembling fingers. If L remains at house past 12:30 p.m. Plan B, M reveals history with L. Himself frames it as L's obsession. M presents evidence of L stalking him, emails drafted ready to send from L's spoofed address. Plan C. Mum reveals concern about L's mental health, suggests she needs professional help, creates scene where leaving seems like best option for everyone. Plan D. Fire alarm at 2:50 p.m. device, pre-positioned in basement evacuation, chaos L gets accidentally locked out, during confusion misses 3 p.m. meeting. They had backup plans, multiple scenarios. They'd thought of everything. I photographed it all, my mind reeling. Emily hadn't just planned to humiliate me. She'd engineered an entire system of psychological warfare designed to force me out of my own inheritance. And if the emotional torture didn't work, they were prepared to escalate to outright sabotage. I was closing the document when I noticed in another folder I'd missed in my initial scan. It sat at the bottom of the screen, the name making my blood run cold. Mom's insurance policy, backup plan. I glanced at my phone. 2:47 p.m. They'd been gone for hours. They could be back any minute. I should close the laptop, retreat to my room, pretend I'd seen nothing. But I had to know. Whatever was in that folder, I needed to see it. My cursor hovered over the folder name, my finger poised over the trackpad. From somewhere outside, I heard a car door slam. My heart stopped. Were they back? I couldn't tell if the sound had come from our driveway or a neighbour's. I had seconds to decide. Close the laptop and run or open the folder and risk getting caught. The front door handle rattled. They were home. I slammed the laptop shut and dove behind the couch just as the front door swung open. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain they could hear it from across the room. I still think the ivory is too bland. Emily's voice drifted in, followed by the rustle of shopping bags. But Mum, you're probably right about the venue. The garden option does photograph better. You'll be stunning, no matter what you choose, sweetheart. My mother's heels clicked across the hardwood floor, heading toward the kitchen. Let me make us some tea. All that shopping has exhausted me. I stayed frozen behind the couch, barely breathing, as Emily moved around the living room. I heard her pause and my stomach dropped. Had I left the laptop screen at a strange angle? Had I disturbed the magazines too much? Could she tell someone had been touching her things? "Mom, did you move my laptop?" Emily called out. "No, dear. Why would I? It's just, I thought I left it more centered on the table." A pause that lasted an eternity. Never mind. I'm probably remembering wrong. I waited until I heard Emily's footsteps retreat toward the kitchen before I dared to move. Slowly, carefully, I crawled out from behind the couch and slipped up the stairs, my legs shaking so badly I had to grip the banister for support. Back in my room, I collapsed on the bed and stared at my phone at the dozens of incriminating photos I'd just taken. I had evidence now. Proof of Emily's plan. But I still didn't know what was in that other folder, the one labelled with my mother's name. And something told me that folder contained the missing piece of this puzzle. The next morning, I woke to an empty house again. Another note. Gone to meet with the caterer. Back by 2. This time, I didn't waste a second. I went straight to the living room, but Emily's laptop was gone. Of course, she wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. Frustrated, I began searching the room more thoroughly, looking for anything that might give me additional insight into Emily's mind. That's when I noticed the built-in bookshelves that lined one wall. Most held my mother's interior design books and Emily's old high school trophies, but on the bottom shelf, partially hidden behind a stack of photo albums, was a small wooden box I'd never seen before. I pulled it out and opened it carefully. Inside were layers of childhood memories, old birthday cards, faded ribbons from school events, photographs of Emily at various ages, and beneath it all a small diary with a worn purple cover and a broken clasp. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that even as my fingers traced the cover, this was private, intimate, the thoughts of a child. But I needed to understand. I needed to know how the little girl in these photos had become the woman orchestrating my destruction. The diary was from Emily's 14th year, the handwriting round and careful at first, growing more jagged and desperate as the entries progressed. I flipped to a page at random and began to read. Dad looked right through me today when I showed him my report card. 3 A's and a B+, but all he said was, "That's nice, Emmy," and then asked where Leah was. He wanted to hear about her debate tournament. Mom says she'll always love me most. At least I have that. At least someone sees me. My throat tightened. I turned the page. Leah won another award today. The whole dinner was about her speech at the regional competition. Dad was so proud. He kept saying how articulate she is, how mature for her age. I tried to tell them about making the varsity soccer team as a freshman, but nobody was listening. Mum squeezed my hand under the table like she understood, but she didn't say anything. She never says anything when Dad talks about Leah, like she's some kind of genius, and I'm just here. I turned more pages, each entry a small wound that had apparently never healed. I heard them fighting last night. Dad and Mum. Dad said he's not happy anymore, that he hasn't been for years. He said he's thinking about leaving. Mum was crying and asking about us, about me and Leah. And Dad said, I can't stop thinking about this. He said he'd want to take Leah with him. Just Leah, not me. He didn't even think about me. When Mum asked what about Emily, there was this long silence, and then he said, Margaret can keep Emily. She's always been yours anyway. Like I'm a possession. Like I don't even count as his daughter. The diary trembled in my hands. I'd never known our father had wanted to leave, had planned to take only me. I'd spent my entire childhood feeling invisible, not realising that Emily had felt erased in a different way. Mum told me today that Dad doesn't love me the way he loves Leah. She said some fathers just bond more with one child, that it's not my fault. She promised she would always love me more than Leah, that I would always be her special girl. It made me feel better at first, but now I'm lying in bed wondering why I have to be second choice. Why does Leah get to be Dad's favourite and I get to be Mum's? Why can't I just be someone's first choice? The entries continue documenting years of small heartbreaks and perceived rejections. Every achievement of mine that overshadowed hers. Every moment our father praised me while overlooking her. Every time she tried and failed to measure up to a standard she didn't even fully understand. And then, dated 6 months before our father's death. I don't matter to anyone except Mum. Dad is still planning to leave. I heard him on the phone with a lawyer talking about custody. He wants to take Leah to Seattle with him. He didn't even think about me. I'm not even part of the equation. I'm invisible. I don't exist to him. I closed the diary carefully, my eyes burning. This didn't excuse what Emily had done. It didn't justify the manipulation, the blackmail, the elaborate scheme to destroy me. But for the first time, I saw the whole picture. Emily wasn't just cruel for cruelty's sake. She was a wounded child who'd grown into a wounded woman, still desperately trying to win a competition our father had started decades ago. We'd both been victims of our parents' failures, just in different ways. I'd been erased by neglect. She'd been erased by comparison. And somehow, instead of finding solidarity in our shared pain, we'd become enemies. The sound of a car engine in the driveway jolted me back to the present. I shoved the diary back into the box and tried to arrange everything exactly as I'd found it. In my haste, I didn't notice the small photograph that slipped out from between the diary pages and fluttered down behind the bookshelf, disappearing into the narrow gap where I couldn't reach it. I just made it to the stairs when the front door opened, and Emily's voice rang out bright and false. "Leah, are you home? We brought lunch." I painted on a smile and descended the stairs. "Just reading in my room. What did you bring?" The next 2 days passed in agonizing normalcy. Emily and my mother discussed flower arrangements and seating charts. Mark came for dinner and barely looked at me, playing the role of devoted fiancé with uncomfortable precision. I smiled, nodded, pretended everything was fine, while my phone burned in my pocket with its cache of incriminating photos. I knew Emily's plan now, but I still didn't know what my mother's role was beyond complicity. That folder, Mum's insurance policy, haunted me. What leverage did my mother have? What was the backup plan if everything else failed? On the morning of day 6, my mother announced over breakfast that she and Emily would be gone all day for a venue tour 3 hours away. "The final decision," she said, squeezing Emily's hand. "We need to book soon if we want the garden for next June." "Will you be okay here alone?" Emily asked me. Her concern so perfectly performed, I almost believed it. "We'll probably be gone until dinner time. The drive is long." "I'll be fine," I assured her. "I have some work emails to catch up on anyway." I watched them drive away, waiting a full 10 minutes after their casa disappeared before I moved. This was it, my only chance. 4 hours, maybe 5 if traffic was bad. Enough time to find what I needed. Emily's laptop sat on the desk in her room, this time plugged in and charging. I lifted the screen and was greeted by the password prompt I'd expected. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. What would Emily use? She'd always been predictable in some ways, sentimental in others. I tried her birthday, 05/15/90. The screen shook incorrect password. Mark's name, incorrect. Then I remembered the diary, the entries about feeling invisible, about Mum being the only one who loved her. I typed, Margaret, 1990. The screen unlocked. I was in. My hand shook as I navigated to the folder I'd seen before, Mum's insurance policy, backup plan. This time no one would interrupt me. This time I'd see everything. The folder contained dozens of files meticulously organised by date and category. I started with the subfolder labelled Mark Chen, Phase 2 Leverage. Inside were email drafts, screenshots, and doctored documents that made my stomach turn. Emily had created an entire false narrative about Mark harassing a female colleague at his company. The screenshots showed her text messages supposedly from Mark that were sexually explicit and threatening. But in a subfolder labelled Originals, I found the real messages, completely innocent work conversations that Emily had edited, changing timestamps and content to make them appear predatory. There was more. A template for an anonymous tip to Mark's HR department. A backup plan involving a fake police report if the HR complaint didn't work. Emily had built a complete arsenal of fabricated evidence ready to deploy the moment Mark showed any sign of resistance. But the most damning evidence was a video file timestamped 3 months ago. I clicked it, and Emily's face filled the screen. She was sitting in what looked like a hotel room, filming herself on her phone. "Mark, I know you found the files. I know you know the truth now." Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. "But here's the thing. It doesn't matter. You're going to propose to me this weekend, like we planned, and you're going to be the most devoted fiancé anyone's ever seen. Because if you don't, I will destroy you. I'll send everything to your boss, to the press, to every contact in your professional network. Your career will be over. Your reputation will be ruined. And the best part, no one will believe you when you say it's fake. I'm that good." She leaned closer to the camera, her smile widening. "I did what I had to do to keep you. And you're going to do what you have to do to keep your life from falling apart. See you this weekend, babe." The video ended. I sat, frozen horror washing over me in waves. This wasn't just manipulation. This was systematic, calculated psychological torture. Emily had trapped Mark in a cage of fabricated evidence and threats, forcing him to play along with her fantasy of their relationship. I copied the video file, along with every document in the folder, to my phone. Then I pulled out the USB drive I'd brought and copied everything again. 2 backups. I couldn't risk losing this evidence. The next folder was labelled Leah Cunningham, Career Destruction Option. My blood ran cold as I opened it. Inside were more doctored documents, emails supposedly from me discussing insider trading, screenshots of financial transactions that looked like embezzlement, even a fake resignation letter written by me that admitted to fraud. None of it was real, but it looked real. Devastatingly real. Emily had built the same trap for me that she'd built for Mark. If I tried to expose her, she'd destroy my career just as thoroughly as she'd threatened to destroy his. We were both prisoners in her elaborate scheme, blackmailed into silence by evidence that didn't exist, but that would ruin us if she deployed it. I photographed everything, my movements mechanical now. The shock had given way to a cold, focused anger. Emily wasn't just cruel, she was dangerous. And she'd been planning this for so long with such meticulous attention to detail that I couldn't help but wonder what else she was capable of. The final folder I opened was labelled simply, Mum, Contingency. Inside was a single document, a PDF scan of what looked like medical records. I opened it and felt the world tilt. They were my father's hospital records from his accident, the one that had left him weak and dependent in his final year. But these weren't the records I'd seen before. These included physician notes that had been highlighted in yellow. Patient's wife repeatedly requested increased sedation despite lack of medical necessity. Another note, concerned about spouse's insistence on medication adjustments. Patient recovery slower than expected given injury severity. There was a handwritten letter at the bottom of the file dated 6 months after my father's death. It was from a nurse at the hospital, addressed to my grandfather, Mr. Cunningham. I felt you should know that during your son's final months, I had concerns about his wife's involvement in his care. I cannot prove anything definitively, but the pattern of her requests and his deteriorating condition troubled me. I thought someone in the family should be aware. My grandfather had known. He'd known my mother had interfered with my father's recovery, had kept him weak and medicated, and Emily had found These records somehow was keeping them as insurance. But insurance against what I was still staring at the screen, trying to process what I'd found when I heard it footsteps on the front porch. Heavy, quick, multiple sets. They were home. 3 hours early. I had seconds. I closed all the windows shut, the laptop, checked the desk to make sure everything looked undisturbed. My phone and USB drive were in my pocket. The evidence was safe, but I was trapped in Emily's room with no explanation for why I was there. The front door opened. "Leah," my mother's voice called out. "Where are you? The venue was a disaster. They double booked. We came straight back." Emily's footsteps were already on the stairs, moving fast. I looked around desperately for an escape route, but there was only one door, and Emily was about to walk through it. The door opened, and Emily froze in the doorway, her eyes locking onto mine. For one terrible second, neither of us moved. "What are you doing in my room?" Her voice was ice. My mind raced through possible excuses and settled on the simplest truth wrapped in a lie. "Your phone. It was ringing downstairs and I brought it up. I was just about to leave it on your desk." I gestured vaguely toward her nightstand where, by sheer luck, her phone actually sat charging. Emily's eyes followed my gesture, then snapped back to me. "My phone has been here all day." "The house phone, I meant," I corrected quickly. "Someone called asking for you. I came up to tell you, but you weren't back yet, so I trailed off, letting the explanation hang incomplete, and therefore somehow more believable. She pushed past me into the room, her movements sharp with suspicion. I took the opportunity to slip toward the door, but her voice stopped me. "Who called?" "I don't know. They hung up when I said you weren't home." Emily moved to her desk, her hand hovering over her laptop. My pulse thundered in my ears as she opened it. The screen came to life, and I watched her fingers fly across the trackpad, clicking, scrolling, checking. "Leah?" My mother's voice drifted up from downstairs. "Can you help me with these bags?" I seized the escape. "I should... wait." Emily's voice was flat dangerous. She was staring at her screen at something I couldn't see from the doorway. "Someone accessed my laptop at 1:47 p.m. while we were gone." My throat went dry, but I forced confusion into my expression. "Maybe you left it running." "It was closed when I left. Password protected." She looked up at me, and I saw the moment's suspicion crystallized into certainty in her eyes. "Were you on my computer?" "Why would I do that?" I kept my voice steady even as panic clawed at my chest. "That's what I'm asking you." Emily stood positioning herself between me and the door. "What were you really doing in my room, Leah?" My mother appeared at the top of the stairs, slightly breathless. "What's going on?" I heard raised voices. "Mom, someone went through my laptop while we were gone." Emily's voice remained controlled, but I could hear the fury beneath it. "And I found Leah in my room just now." My mother looked between us, her expression troubled. "Leah, did you use Emily's computer?" I met her eyes directly. "I checked the weather forecast on my phone earlier, that's all. I haven't touched Emily's laptop." The lie came out clean confident. I pulled out my phone and opened the weather app, which I'd made sure to access the moment I'd heard their car insurance for exactly this scenario. "See, 1:49 p.m. I needed to know if we should plan for rain this weekend." Emily snatched my phone, examining the timestamp. "That doesn't prove anything. Someone still accessed my laptop." "Emily, sweetheart." My mother's voice took on that soothing tone she reserved for Emily's rare moments of distress. "Are you sure someone accessed it? Could it have been a software update or something automatic?" "I know what I'm looking at, Mum." But doubt had crept into Emily's voice. "The history shows..." "Shows what exactly?" I asked, taking a calculated risk. "That someone looked at your files. Did they change anything? Delete anything? Or did the computer just wake up on its own like laptops do?" Emily's jaw tightened. She couldn't admit what was actually in those files, couldn't explain why she was so paranoid without revealing what she was hiding. I watched her struggle with the impossible position she'd put herself in, wanting to accuse me, but unable to say what she thought I'd found. "This is ridiculous," my mother said finally. "Emily, you're working yourself into a state over nothing. You've been stressed all week, the wedding planning, the venue disaster today, making sure everything is perfect for tomorrow's announcement. You're seeing threats where there aren't any." "I'm not imagining this." Emily's eyes never left my face. "Something happened while we were gone." "Then check your files," I said quietly, calling her bluff. "If someone went through your computer and found something they shouldn't have, you will know, won't you?" The colour drained slightly from Emily's face. She couldn't check not in front of me, not in front of Mum, because checking would mean opening files she couldn't explain having. Files about destroying Mark's career. Files about fabricating evidence against me. Files about what Mum had done to Dad. "I don't need to check right now," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "I just need to know if you were in my room." "I told you I came up to tell you about the phone call that never happened." I softened my tone, adding a layer of hurt. "I know we're not close, Emily, but I wouldn't violate your privacy like that. I understand boundaries." My mother placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "See, a misunderstanding. Now we brought lunch and it's getting cold. Let's go eat and forget about this. Tomorrow's a big day and we all need to stay calm." Emily stared at me for another long moment, and I could see her mind working, trying to find proof of what her instincts were screaming at her. But she had nothing concrete, and the longer she pushed, the more unhinged she would appear. "Fine," she said finally, "but I'm changing my password and Leah..." Her voice dropped to something almost conversational, which made it more threatening. "I'm watching you now." I followed them downstairs, my legs steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. I'd gotten away with it barely. But Emily knew. She didn't have proof, but she knew something had shifted, that the invisible sister had suddenly become a threat. That night, I lay in bed with my door cracked open, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Around 11, I heard Emily's door open, and her footsteps moved to the bathroom. Then, instead of going back to her room, I heard her voice low and urgent. She was on the phone. I crept to my door, pressing my ear against the crack. "I don't care what time it is, this is important." Emily's voice was sharp with stress. "No, I think she knows something. I can't prove it, but she was acting weird and my laptop..." A pause. "Yes, I checked everything. Nothing's missing, but the access time is right when they would have been here alone." Another pause longer this time. "No, we stick to the plan. Tomorrow, at the brunch, we make our move. If anything, this makes it more urgent. We need to get her out before she figures out too much." My blood ran cold. Tomorrow, the brunch, the choreographed humiliation that would drive me from the house before the 3 p.m. meeting with the lawyer. "Everything's in place," Emily continued. "Mom knows her part. Mark knows what he has to do. The relatives are prepped. We just need to execute." A soft, bitter laugh. "Trust me, by tomorrow afternoon, Leah will be so desperate to leave, she'll practically run out the door. And once she's gone, everything falls into place." The call ended. I heard her footsteps retreat to her room, the door closed softly. I climbed back into bed, but sleep was impossible. Tomorrow morning, they would begin their attack. They would try to break me, humiliate me, drive me away from my own inheritance. But this time, I knew what was coming. And I had something they didn't know about evidence that would destroy them as thoroughly as they planned to destroy me. The question was, when should I use it? I was still awake at 2 a.m, my mind spinning through scenarios and counter moves when my phone lit up with an email notification. The sender name made me sit up straight, Morrison & Associates, but not the Morrison I'd spoken with initially. This was a different firm, a Seattle address. "Ms. Cunningham, urgent matter regarding George Cunningham estate. Time-sensitive information has come to light that requires immediate discussion. Please call my direct line at your earliest convenience regardless of hour. Richard Morrison, Senior Partner." My hand shook as I dialed the number. It rang twice before a man's gravelly voice answered. "Ms. Cunningham, thank you for calling so promptly." He sounded wide awake despite the hour. "I apologise for the late contact, but given tomorrow's scheduled meeting, I felt it couldn't wait." "What is this about?" I kept my voice low, conscious of Emily in the next room. "I was your grandfather's personal attorney for 32 years. 5 years ago, shortly before his death, he gave me a sealed package with very specific instructions." He paused and I heard papers rustling. "I was to open it only if certain conditions were met, specifically if there was any indication that your mother had contested or manipulated his will." My heart hammered against my ribs. And those conditions were met. "Yesterday afternoon, I received a call from a concerned party, I can't disclose who, alerting me to irregularities in the probate filing." I opened the package. "Miss Cunningham, I think we need to meet in person. Can you come to my office this morning, say 7 a.m? I agreed and spent the rest of the night watching the ceiling, afraid to sleep and miss the alarm. At 6, I slipped out of the house and drove to the address he'd provided, a modest office in an older building downtown. Richard Morrison was in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the careful movements of someone who chose his actions deliberately. He gestured me to a chair and placed a manila folder on the desk between us. "Your grandfather was a remarkable man," he began, "and he was no fool. He knew your mother had, shall we say, complicated feelings about you and your sister. He suspected she might try to interfere with his final wishes." He opened the folder and slid the first document toward me. "This is a certified copy of your grandfather's actual last will and testament, dated March 2019. It stipulates 60% of his estate to you, 40% to Emily, with the attendance clause requiring your presence at a family meeting on your birthday." "I was told about that will," I said. "That's why I'm here this week." "Yes, but what you weren't told is that your mother submitted a different will to probate court." He showed me a second document. "This one, dated 2015, splits everything 50-50 and has no attendance requirements. Your mother claimed the newer will was destroyed in a kitchen fire in late 2019. But there was no fire." "Correct. Your grandfather anticipated this possibility. He kept the original in a secure deposit box and gave me this certified copy with instructions to intervene if needed." He pulled out a USB drive. "He also recorded a video message. Would you like to see it?" He turned his laptop toward me and pressed play. My grandfather's face filled the screen and my eyes immediately burned with tears. He looked tired but determined, sitting in what I recognized as his study. "Leah, my dear girl." His voice was exactly as I remembered, warm, steady, certain. "If you're watching this, then something has gone wrong. Your mother has done what I feared she might do, and for that I'm deeply sorry. I should have protected you better while I was alive." He leaned forward, his expression intensifying. "I want you to understand something. The split in the will isn't arbitrary. I left you more because I know you'll use it wisely, not because I loved Emily less. But your mother has spent your entire life trying to diminish you to make you small, so Emily could shine brighter. I saw it. Your father saw it. We tried to stop it, but we failed you." His eyes seemed to look directly into mine across the years. "You are stronger than they know, stronger than you know. The attendance clause isn't meant to torture you, it's meant to test whether you can withstand their cruelty long enough to claim what's rightfully yours. Don't let them break you, Leah. The truth is your weapon. Use it wisely." The video ended. I sat in silence, tears streaming down my face as Richard Morrison quietly pushed a box of tissues across the desk. "He believed in you," the lawyer said gently, "and he made sure you'd have what you needed to fight back. This will supersede anything your mother filed. The probate fraud case is clear-cut. But your grandfather wanted you to have the choice. You can pursue criminal charges against your mother, or you can simply correct the record and move forward." I wiped my eyes. When is the official meeting? 3 p.m. today at your mother's house. I'll be there with all documentation. Your grandfather's wishes will be honoured regardless of what happens before then. But he wanted you to know you don't have to endure their cruelty in silence. You have power now. Use it however you see fit. I left his office as dawn was breaking, my grandfather's words echoing in my mind. The truth is your weapon. I had 2 sets of evidence now, Emily's files and grandfather's legal protection. The question was no longer if I would fight back, but how? My phone buzzed as I reached my car. A text from an unknown number. I found something. It's about your father's accident. We need to talk tonight. M. Mark. He'd found something about Dad, something he thought I needed to know before tomorrow's confrontation. I looked at the message, then at the time. The brunch started in 3 hours. Emily's carefully orchestrated attack would begin soon, and I was walking into it armed with more truth than any of them realised. I texted back, after the brunch, I'll find you. Whatever Mark had discovered would have to wait. Right now, I had a performance of my own to prepare for. The brunch wasn't until 10, which gave me 3 hours I spent pacing my room and replaying my grandfather's words. The truth is your weapon. But there was still one piece of truth I didn't have, whatever Mark had discovered about my father's accident. At 8:30, I couldn't wait any longer. I texted Mark, meet me now. Riverside Park, the old pavilion. We need to talk before this all happens. His response came immediately. I'm already here. I found him sitting on a bench in the empty park, looking like he hadn't slept. A manila folder sat on the bench beside him, thick with papers. He stood when he saw me, his expression a complicated mix of guilt and determination. You said you found something about Dad, I said without preamble. I didn't have time for pleasantries, and after everything I wasn't sure Mark deserved them anyway. I did. He picked up the folder, held it for a moment like he was deciding something, then handed it to me. But first, you need to understand why I have this. Why I have any of this. I opened the folder and found myself looking at business documents, project proposals, email chains, presentation decks, all from Emily's company. What am I looking at? 2 years ago, I pitched a cybersecurity platform to my company, revolutionary encryption technology. They loved it, fast-tracked development. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. 6 months later, Emily's firm announced a nearly identical product, beat us to market by 3 months. My company accused me of leaking proprietary information. I almost lost everything. Emily stole your work. It wasn't a question. She had access to it through Mark's professional network. We'd started dating by then, or rather she'd started executing phase 2 of whatever plan she'd been running. He looked away, jaw clenched. She destroyed my professional reputation, forced me into this engagement, and made millions off my idea. So yes, I've been gathering evidence for months. Every document, every email, every piece of proof that she's a fraud. I looked down at the folder again, understanding dawning cold and sick in my stomach. And you needed someone with access to her personal files, someone she wouldn't suspect. The silence stretched too long. Did you come back into my life just to use me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Was everything at that coffee shop, everything you said about being blackmailed, was that just to manipulate me into helping you? It wasn't like that. But he wouldn't meet my eyes. The blackmail is real. Everything I told you about Emily threatening my career is true. But yes, I also knew that if you were at the house, if you had access to her computer, you might find evidence that could help us both. Us both. I felt something crack inside my chest. There is no us, Mark. You used me, just like Emily used you, just like my mother used my father. Everyone in this family is just a tool for someone else's agenda. Leah, please, what's in here about my father? I cut him off, holding up the folder. You said you found something about his accident. Mark finally looked at me, and I saw genuine regret in his eyes. Medical records. I hacked into the hospital database when I was investigating your mother for Emily's files. I found notes from your father's doctors expressing concern about your mother's involvement in his care, orders she placed medication she requested, and then I found this. He pulled out a single sheet from the back of the folder. An email from your father to his lawyer dated 2 weeks before the accident. He was planning to file for divorce and sole custody of you. The lawyer confirmed receipt and said he'd draft the papers. I stared at the email, my father's words blurring as my eyes filled with tears. He was going to take me away. Your mother found out. I can't prove it, but the timing the accident happened exactly 1 week after this email. And all those medical concerns started immediately after. Mark's voice softened. I'm sorry, I know this is a lot. But you deserve to know the truth about what your mother is capable of. And you're telling me this now because it helps your case against Emily. The words tasted bitter. One more piece of leverage. One more tool in your arsenal. I'm telling you because you're walking into a nightmare in 2 hours and you need to know who you're really dealing with. He stepped closer and I stepped back. Yes, I used you. Yes, I should have been honest from the start. But Leah, I do care about what happens to you. I'm not the man I was 4 years ago, the one who walked away because I was too weak to fight. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking you to take this information and protect yourself. I looked at the folder in my hands at all the evidence Mark had gathered. Evidence I didn't need because I'd already found it myself. Evidence he'd wanted me to find so I could do his dirty work for him. I already have everything, I said quietly. I broke into Emily's laptop days ago. I have all the proof of her fraud, her blackmail, her plans. I didn't need you to manipulate me into it. I figured it out on my own. Mark's face went pale. All this time you already knew. I knew she was planning something. I found it myself. Which means every conversation we've had since that coffee shop you were playing me, testing me, trying to control me. I shook my head disgusted. You and Emily deserve each other. You both see people as game pieces. I turned to walk away, but something made me look back. Mark stood there looking broken, and I realised I felt nothing. No residual love, no sympathy, not even anger anymore. Just emptiness where he used to matter. I'm going to expose her, I said. Not for you, not for revenge, but because it's the right thing to do. Because my grandfather believed I was strong enough to stand up for the truth, and I'm not going to let him down. I met Mark's eyes one final time. And Mark, after this is over, I never want to see you again. Not at family dinners, not at holidays, not even at Emily's funeral someday. You stay out of my life, permanently. I walked away without waiting for his response. Behind me, I heard him call my name once, but I didn't turn around. I had a brunch to attend, a family to confront, and a truth gear to wield, like the weapon my grandfather had promised it would be. When I returned to the house, it had transformed into controlled chaos. Catering vans lined the driveway, and through the windows I could see florists arranging elaborate centerpieces on tables that hadn't been there yesterday. Emily stood in the middle of it all, like a general commanding troops clipboard in hand, directing traffic with the confidence of someone who believed she'd already won. I slipped in through the side door, hoping to avoid detection, but my mother intercepted me in the hallway. There you are! Where have you been? Emily wanted your opinion on the table settings. The lie came so easily to her, this pretense, that my opinion had ever mattered. Just went for a drive, I said. Clear my head before the big day. Well, you're back now. Come help. She gestured toward the dining room, where Emily was debating napkin placement with a harried-looking caterer. I spent the next 3 hours playing the role I'd perfected over 36 years, the helpful, invisible sister. I carried chairs, I adjusted flower arrangements, I smiled and nodded while Emily dismissed every suggestion I made. I watched my mother and sister move in perfect synchronization, finishing each other's sentences, sharing private jokes, existing in a bubble of two that had never had room for me. But this time, instead of the familiar ache of exclusion, I felt something different. Clarity. I understood now that this hadn't been accidental neglect or unintentional favoritism. This had been systematic erasure carefully maintained over decades. They hadn't just preferred Emily, they'd actively worked to diminish me so she could shine brighter. Relatives began arriving in the late afternoon. Aunt Sarah, who I now knew, had been prepped to ask about my love life at precisely 11:30 tomorrow. Uncle James, who would be prompted to express disappointment in me. Cousin Rachel, ready to play her role in the performance they'd choreographed. They greeted Emily with enthusiasm, and me with perfunctory hugs already divided into teams before they even knew there was a war. That evening, Emily insisted on a rehearsal dinner, even though there was no wedding to rehearse for just tomorrow's brunch. 15 of us crowded around the expanded dining table, while Emily stood at the head glass raised playing bride before she'd even set a date. "I just want to say how grateful I am to have you all here," she began, her voice practiced and warm. "Tomorrow, we celebrate new beginnings, family bonds, and the love that ties us all together. Mark and I are so blessed to be surrounded by people who've supported us from the start." She looked around the table, her gaze skipping over me so smoothly that most people probably didn't notice. "To family, to love, to the future." Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too, tasting the champagne that was supposed to be for my birthday at a dinner that was supposedly in my honour but featured not a single mention of me. After dinner, as relatives dispersed to their hotels and guest rooms, I retreated upstairs. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Mark's name in the sender field made me hesitate, but curiosity won out. The subject line read, "I'm sorry for everything. This should help." The attachment was a forensic accounting report, professionally prepared, documenting the timeline of my grandfather's will, the probate fraud, and my mother's financial manipulation. Mark had compiled everything, dates, document numbers, expert analysis. It was thorough, damning, and completely unnecessary, since Attorney Morrison already had the legal documentation we needed. But as I scrolled through it, I realised what Mark had actually given me. Not just evidence, but a weapon I could wield independent of the lawyer. Morrison would present the legal case at 3 o'clock, but if I chose to, I could expose the fraud myself on my terms during the brunch. I saved the file to my phone, adding it to the arsenal I'd already built. Emily's blackmail evidence, Mark's stolen work, Mum's interference with Dad's medical care, grandfather's video testimony, and now detailed forensic proof of the will fraud. They thought they were walking into a performance they'd choreographed. They had no idea I'd rewritten the entire script. My phone alarm chirped the reminder I'd set days ago, when this week had started tomorrow, 10 a.m. family brunch, 3 p.m. Attorney Morrison arrives. Time to end this. I lay in bed staring at that notification, my heart strangely calm. Tomorrow, Emily would stand up and try to steal my birthday, my dignity, my inheritance. Tomorrow, my mother would play her part in humiliating me into leaving. Tomorrow, relatives who'd known me my entire life would turn on me at scheduled intervals, performing cruelty they'd rehearsed. And tomorrow, I would show them all exactly what the invisible daughter had been watching, gathering, and preparing for. I fell asleep with my phone on my nightstand, and my grandfather's voice echoing in my mind. "The truth is your weapon. Use it wisely." Tomorrow, I would. I woke at dawn on my birthday feeling eerily calm, like an actor who'd rehearsed her lines so many times that stage fright had transformed into readiness. I dressed carefully, not in the muted colours I usually chose to stay invisible, but in a deep navy dress that made me feel armoured. I checked my laptop one final time, ensuring all the files were properly organised and ready to display. Then I went downstairs to face my family. The house already hummed with activity. Caterers moved efficiently through the kitchen, preparing the elaborate brunch spread that was nominally for my birthday. but had been designed entirely around Emily's aesthetic preferences. Through the dining room windows, I could see tables set up in the garden, white linens and fresh flowers catching the morning light. Emily appeared at 10 o'clock sharp, radiant, in a cream-coloured dress that looked suspiciously bridal. She kissed my cheek with practiced warmth. "Happy birthday, sis. Today's going to be special, I promise." She had no idea how right she was. Guests began arriving at 10:15, Aunt Sarah with her husband, Uncle James and his partner, Cousin Rachel with her children, family friends who'd known us for decades. They wished me happy birthday in passing, but their real attention was on Emily gravitating toward her like moths to flame. By 10:30, 20 people filled our dining room and spilled into the garden mimosas in hand, waiting for whatever Emily had promised them. I sat at the far end of the main table, my laptop bag at my feet, watching the performance unfold exactly as Emily had scripted it. My mother played hostess, ensuring everyone had drinks and food. Mark stood near Emily, his discomfort visible only to someone who knew to look for it. And Emily held court, basking in attention, checking her watch periodically to stay on schedule. At exactly 10:30, Emily stood and raised her mimosa glass. The room quieted instantly, all eyes turning to her. Before tonight's celebration, she began, her voice warm and rehearsed. "Mark and I have wonderful news to share with our closest family and friends." She reached for Mark's hand, pulling him to stand beside her. "We've set a date for our wedding. Next June will be..." I stood up. The movement was quiet, deliberate, but in the hushed room it drew every eye like a magnet. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and clear, "before Emily continues, I have something everyone should see. It's about our family and the truth." The room went still. Emily's smile froze on her face, her hands suspended in the air mid-gesture. My mother's mimosa glass stopped halfway to her lips, and I watched the colour drain from her face. Mark stared down at his plate like he could disappear into the china pattern. Aunt Sarah and Uncle James exchanged confused glances, unsure whether this was part of the planned festivities. I reached down and pulled my laptop from its bag, moving with the calm certainty of someone who'd crossed a line they could never uncross. I walked to where the TV was mounted on the wall. Emily had insisted on having it there for her announcement presentation, and connected my laptop with the HDMI cable that was already conveniently in place. "Leah, what are you doing?" My mother's voice was sharp with warning, but underneath, I heard something else. Fear. "Sit down, sweetheart," Emily said, her tone attempting lightness, but landing on desperation. "Whatever you think you need to say, we can talk about it later. This isn't the time. This is exactly the time." I turned to face the room, my laptop screen now mirrored on the large TV behind me. "You're all here because Emily said today would be special, because she wanted to make an announcement in front of the people who matter most. Well, I have an announcement too, about lies, about manipulation, about stolen inheritances and destroyed lives." "Leah." My mother stood now, her voice dropping to that dangerous quiet she used before explosions. "Whatever you think you're doing, stop this right now." "Why?" I met her eyes directly. "Afraid of what they'll see." Emily laughed, but it sounded brittle. "Everyone, I apologize. My sister has been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe we should..." "I'm not stressed, Emily. I'm informed." I turned back to my laptop and pulled up the first file. "This is about the truth about what Emily has done, what Mom has done, what this family has been built on." I looked around the room at the confused, uncomfortable faces. "You all came here expecting a wedding announcement. You'll get that. But first, you're going to see exactly what kind of marriage Emily has orchestrated and what kind of family has allowed it." My finger hovered over the key that would display the first email exchange on the screen. "This all starts with these emails," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Emails that Emily sent to threaten, manipulate, and destroy the man she claims to love. Emails that reveal exactly what she's capable of when she wants something. I pressed the key. The first email appeared on the screen large enough for everyone to read. An email from Emily to Mark's HR department, never sent, but fully drafted, complete with fabricated evidence of harassment. The room erupted into whispers, and I had only just begun. I advanced to the next slide, showing an email side by side with its altered version. On the left, a harmless work email from Mark to a colleague discussing a project deadline. On the right, the same email with text changed to suggest inappropriate advances, timestamps altered to make it appear sent late at night instead of during business hours. "These are Emily's creations," I said, my voice steady as the whispers grew louder. On the left, the original communications. On the right, the versions she manufactured to threaten Mark into staying with her. "That's absurd," Emily said, her voice pitched too high. "Leah, you're clearly upset about something, but making up lies about me to ruin my engagement is—" "I didn't make these up, Emily. You did." I clicked through 3 more examples, each showing the meticulous forgery. Notice the metadata here. I zoomed in on the file properties visible at the bottom of one image. "Created in Photoshop, saved to your laptop, last modified 3 months ago when Mark first tried to leave you." Aunt Teresa, my father's sister, and a recently retired attorney stood up from her seat and moved closer to the screen. She studied the images in silence, her expression growing darker with each slide. "These modifications are sophisticated," she said finally, her lawyer voice cutting through the chaos. "This isn't amateur work. Someone spent significant time creating fraudulent evidence." "It's fake," Emily insisted, but her voice wavered. "Leah obviously doctored those files herself to make me look bad. She's been jealous of my relationship with Mark since 4 years ago, when you drove him away from me the first time." I interrupted, meeting her eyes. "Should we talk about that?" "Emily? About the fake text messages you showed him to convince him I was mocking him behind his back?" Mark made a small sound halfway between a gasp and a groan. Emily shot him a look that would have silenced him a week ago, but he was already standing, his face pale. "It's true," he said quietly. "All of it. Emily showed me fabricated screenshots 4 years ago that made me believe Leah was making fun of me. When I discovered the truth 3 months ago, she threatened to destroy my career with these," he gestured at the screen, "if I tried to leave." "Mark, what are you doing?" Emily hissed. "We talked about this. You promised." "I promised under duress," he said louder now. "I promised because I was terrified. But I'm done being terrified of you." Uncle James stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Emily, is this true? Did you blackmail this man?" "This is ridiculous," my mother interjected, her voice attempting authority, but landing on desperation. "Everyone, please. This is clearly just a misunderstanding between young people. Emily would never—" "I have her voice, Mum." I clicked to the audio file. "Would you like to hear Emily explain in her own words what she did and why?" The room went deadly silent. Emily's face had gone from flushed to ashen. "Don't," she whispered. "Leah, please. Don't do this." For a moment, I almost stopped. I saw the frightened 14-year-old from the diary, the girl who'd spent her childhood feeling invisible beside me. But then I remembered the elaborate plan to humiliate me, the years of casual cruelty, the systematic way she'd tried to erase me from my own life. "You didn't give Mark a choice," I said softly. "Why should I give you one?" I pressed play. Emily's voice filled the room, cheerful and matter-of-fact. "Mark, I know you found the files. I know you know the truth now. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter. You're going to propose to me this weekend, like we planned." As the recording played, I watched the room's reaction. Aunt Teresa's expression went from professional disapproval to genuine horror. Uncle James sank back into his chair, shaking his head. Cousin Rachel covered her mouth with her hand. The family friends who'd known Emily since childhood stared at the screen like they were watching a stranger. "I did what I had to do to keep you, and you're going to do what you have to do to keep your life from falling apart." The recording ended. No one spoke. Emily stood frozen, her careful facade shattered completely. My mother gripped the back of her chair knuckles, white. "That's textbook blackmail," Aunt Teresa said into the silence, her lawyer voice steady but appalled. "Criminal blackmail. Emily, what were you thinking?" "I was thinking," Emily's voice broke, "that I deserved to be chosen for once, that I deserved to have something that was mine, and not because I was living in Leah's shadow." "So you became a criminal?" Uncle James demanded. "Everyone makes mistakes." My mother tried again, but this time several relatives turned to look at her, and whatever they saw in her face made her stop mid-sentence. I advanced to the next slide, my heart hammering, but my hand steady. "But that's just the beginning," I said, looking directly at my mother. "The real betrayal runs much deeper, and it involves our mother." My mother's voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. "Leah, whatever you think you know about family business, this is not the time or place. There's video too," I said, ignoring her. "Would you like to see Emily explain herself in full, where she makes it very clear this wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding, but a calculated plan?" I didn't wait for permission. I clicked play on the video file. Emily's face filled the screen sitting in that hotel room 3 months ago, speaking directly to the camera with chilling calm. The room watched in silence as she laid out her threats to Mark, her casual admission of fabricating evidence, her smug certainty that she'd trapped him completely. When the video ended, the silence was absolute. Then, Aunt Teresa placed her napkin on her plate with deliberate precision and walked out of the room without a word. 2 other relatives followed her, their faces, expressions of disgust and betrayal. Mark pushed back from the table suddenly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. He was shaking, his face flushed with what looked like equal parts shame and relief. "I should have spoken up sooner," he said, his voice breaking. "Emily didn't just blackmail me professionally. She threatened to destroy my reputation, my career, everything I'd built. She said if I tried to leave her, she'd make sure no one in my industry would ever hire me again." He looked around the room, then at me. "I was a coward. I let her control me because I was too afraid to fight back. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Leah." "Don't apologize to her." Emily snapped, her composure finally cracking. "This is exactly what she wants everyone feeling sorry for perfect Leah while I'm the villain." Her voice rose trembling with years of accumulated resentment. "You've always been Dad's favourite. You got everything, his love, his time, his pride, his attention. Every achievement I ever had was footnoted with, but Leah did it better. Every time I tried to connect with him, he was too busy being proud of you." The room shifted uncomfortably. Some faces showed sympathy for Emily, despite everything, while others looked horrified that she was trying to justify blackmail with childhood grievances. "I had nothing but Mum," Emily continued, tears streaming now. "Nothing. You got Dad, you got the inheritance, you got respect. What did I get second place? Always second place to the golden daughter who didn't even appreciate what she had." "Emily, stop!" My mother's voice was sharp, but I heard the panic underneath. She knew where this was going. "No, Mum. She's already destroyed me. Might as well tell the truth." Emily turned back to the room, her face blotchy with tears and rage. "At least Mum saw me. At least Mum loved me even when Dad couldn't be bothered. At least she made sure I wasn't completely erased." "Is that what you told yourself?" I asked quietly. "That Mum's favoritism was love? That her systematic erasure of me was just making sure you weren't forgotten?" "You don't know what it's like," Emily shot back. "To be invisible in your own father's eyes, to spend your whole childhood trying to be good enough and never measuring up." "You're right. I don't know what that's like." I let the words hang for a moment. "Because I was invisible to Mum, the same way you were invisible to Dad. The difference is I didn't turn that pain into a weapon. I didn't blackmail innocent people. I didn't orchestrate elaborate schemes to destroy others." I advanced to the next slide. "And I didn't help Mum commit fraud to steal my grandfather's inheritance." The room erupted in confused exclamations. My mother went rigid. "Leah, stop this, right now," she commanded, but her voice lacked its usual authority. "You had nothing, Emily." I looked at my sister, feeling an unexpected surge of pity mixed with my anger. "Let me show everyone what you and Mum have been hiding. Let me show them what you were willing to do to take even more from me." The next slide appeared on the screen, 2 wills side by side. My grandfather's real will dated 2019, leaving me 60% of his estate, and the fraudulent one my mother had submitted to probate, court dated 2015, splitting everything 50-50. "This," I said, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart, "is what Mum submitted to the court 6 months ago when Grandfather died. And this is what he actually intended, a will that recognised I'd been systematically diminished in this family and tried to balance the scales." Uncle James stood again, moving closer to the screen. "Margaret, what is this?" My mother's face had gone from pale to grey. "This is a private family matter that Leah has blown completely out of proportion. Mom told the probate court that Grandfather's real will was destroyed in a kitchen fire," I continued. "A fire that never happened. She deliberately hid his actual wishes and substituted an older version that benefited Emily." "That's probate fraud," Aunt Teresa called from the doorway where she'd stopped to listen. "Margaret, that's a felony!" The room exploded into chaos, relatives talking over each other, demanding explanations, looking between my mother and the evidence on screen. And in the centre of it all, my mother stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her, while Emily sobbed into her hands, finally understanding that her mother's love had come with a criminal price tag. I clicked to the next slide. "But the fraud goes even deeper than that," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "And it starts with what Mum did to our father." The chaos in the room subsided into tense silence as everyone registered my last words. What Mum did to our father. Even Emily looked up from her hands, confusion cutting through her tears. "Dad," she whispered. "What does Dad have to do with this?" I pulled up the next document, the fire department records I'd obtained showing no incidents at our address in the date range Mum had claimed. There was no kitchen fire. Mum lied to the probate court about why she couldn't produce the real will. But the question is why? Why go to such lengths to hide Grandfather's actual wishes? "Because she knew what was in them," Aunt Teresa said quietly from the doorway. She'd moved back into the room, her lawyer's mind clearly piecing together the puzzle. "Your grandfather must have had reasons for favouring you, Leah. Reasons Margaret didn't want examined too closely." I clicked to the next slide, and my grandfather's face appeared on screen, the video testimony Attorney Morrison had shown me. Several relatives gasped. My grandmother, who'd been sitting silent and stone-faced, made a small sound of pain at seeing her late husband's face. "Grandfather recorded this video 5 years ago," I said. "He gave it to his attorney with instructions to release it only if Mum contested or manipulated his will." I pressed play. My grandfather's voice filled the room, steady and clear. "I'm recording this because I've seen patterns in my family that trouble me deeply. My son wanted to leave Margaret and take Leah with him. He recognised that Margaret's treatment of Leah was damaging, systematic, and deliberate. He planned to file for divorce and seek sole custody." The room erupted in shocked exclamations. My mother's face had gone completely white. "After my son's accident," my grandfather continued, "I watched Margaret take control of his medical care in ways that concerned me. She insisted on medications and treatments that seemed to slow his recovery rather than aid it. When I questioned the doctors, they expressed their own concerns about her involvement." His expression hardened. "I believe Margaret wanted to keep my son weak and dependent so he couldn't leave her and take Leah away. I cannot prove this definitively, but I have gathered documentation that troubles me greatly. That documentation is in the package with this video." I paused the video and pulled up the medical records physician notes. expressing concern about Mum's requests for increased sedation questions, about why recovery was slower than expected, a nurse's letter to my grandfather documenting the same worries. "These are Dad's hospital records," I said quietly, "from the year after his accident. The year before he died, every doctor and nurse noted the same thing: Mum was interfering with his treatment, requesting medications he didn't need, slowing his recovery. That's not..." Mum finally found her voice, but it came out as a croak. "Your father was in pain. I was trying to help him. You were keeping him weak." Uncle James's voice cut across hers, loud and angry. "That's what you were doing, Margaret, keeping him too weak to leave you." "Dad wanted to leave." Emily's voice was small, childlike. "He wanted to take Leah and go." I pulled up the final document, the email from my father to his divorce attorney dated 2 weeks before his accident. The room fell silent as people read his words: plans for custody, concerns about Emily being raised in a toxic environment, his desire to protect at least one daughter from the damage being done. "He was going to take both of us," I said softly, looking at Emily. "Eventually. He wanted to get me out first, establish stability, then come back for you. But the accident happened before he could file the papers." And suddenly Margaret's problems were solved, Aunt Teresa said, her voice cold with understanding. "Her husband was incapacitated, dependent on her care, too weak to leave or fight for custody. How convenient." "I didn't cause the accident," Mum said, but her voice shook. "That was random. It was just..." "But you took advantage of it," I finished. "You used his weakness to keep him trapped. You convinced his doctors to keep him medicated and dependent. And when Grandfather started asking questions, you knew eventually there would be consequences. So you made sure his will, the will that acknowledged what you'd done and tried to protect me, disappeared." Cousin Rachel stood abruptly, her chair clattering backward. "You could go to prison for this probate fraud, possibly medical abuse, Margaret. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about keeping my family together." Mum's voice finally broke emotion flooding through. "I was thinking about Emily, who needed her father. I was thinking about not being abandoned, not being left alone. Everything I did was to protect this family." "You were protecting yourself," Uncle James said quietly, "at everyone else's expense." My grandmother stood then, her movement slow and deliberate. She looked at her daughter-in-law with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, but profound disappointment mixed with grief. "You destroyed my son," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You kept him prisoner in his own body because you were afraid of being alone. And now you've destroyed my granddaughters too, in different ways." She walked out without another word, leaving behind a silence more damning than any accusation. It was Uncle James who finally asked the question I'd been both dreading and anticipating. The accident itself. "Margaret, we were told it was random, a drunk driver, unavoidable, but now, with everything else..." He looked at my mother with dawning horror. "What really happened with your father's accident?" I reached into my bag with trembling hands. This was the moment I'd been dreading most, not because I was afraid of the truth, but because sharing it would make my father's pain public. It would take his private suffering and expose it to everyone. But he'd written these words for a reason. He'd wanted someone to know. "The accident was random," I said quietly, answering Uncle James's question. "A drunk driver ran a red light. That part was true. But what happened after?" I pulled out the leather journal, worn and creased from years of my father's hands holding it. "This is Dad's private journal from the last year of his life. Attorney Morrison gave it to me yesterday. Grandfather had kept it safe all these years, hoping someday it would matter." My mother made a sound halfway between a gasp and a sob. "Leah, don't, please. That was private. Your father wouldn't want..." "He wrote it so someone would know," I said, meeting her eyes. "He wrote it because he was afraid of what was happening to him, and he wanted there to be a record." I opened the journal to a page I'd marked my father's handwriting familiar and heartbreaking. March 30th, 2018 to 2018, 3 weeks after the accident. I began to read aloud, my voice steady despite the tears burning my eyes. Recovery is slower than the doctors expected. They seemed confused the injuries weren't that severe. I should be regaining strength by now. But I'm so tired all the time. Margaret brings me pills the doctors prescribed, but I'm starting to wonder if I need all of them. She insists I do. She says I'm anxious that I need to rest. But I'm not anxious. I'm determined. I want to get strong enough to leave and take Leah with me. I think Margaret knows. I think she's trying to keep me weak. The room had gone completely still. Even Emily had stopped crying, staring at me with dawning horror. I turned the page. April 15, 2018. Talked to Dr. Chen today without Margaret present. He seemed surprised by how many medications I'm taking. He said some of them should have been discontinued weeks ago. When I asked why I'm still taking them, he looked uncomfortable and said my wife had insisted they were helping with my anxiety and pain management. But I'm not in that much pain anymore. I'm just exhausted. Always so exhausted. Margaret was angry when she found out I'd spoken to him alone. She said I was being paranoid, that she was just trying to help me heal. But I saw something in her eyes. Fear. She's afraid I'll get strong enough to leave. Several relatives had hands over their mouths. Uncle James had sat back down looking ill. May 3rd, 2018. Jordan. I continued, my voice beginning to crack. Margaret found the divorce papers I'd hidden. She didn't say anything, just looked at me with this terrible calm. That night, she gave me an extra pill, said the doctor had called with new instructions. I don't think he did. I'm afraid to refuse them because she gets so upset, so worried. She cries and says she's just trying to take care of me. But I'm getting weaker, not stronger. Emily came to visit today. She's so young, so innocent. She has no idea her mother is slowly destroying her father to keep him trapped. I wanted to tell her, but how do you tell a child that? Emily let out a choked sob. No, that's not, Mom wouldn't. But I continued reading the final entry dated 2 weeks before my father died. If anything happens to me, I want Leah to know that I tried. I tried to be strong enough to save her from this house, from the systematic way Margaret erases her to elevate Emily. I tried to get help, but I was too weak. The lawyer stopped returning my calls after Margaret spoke with him. The doctors listened to her, not me. I'm trapped in my own body, watching my daughter be diminished every day, and I don't have the strength to stop it. Leah, if you ever read this, none of this is your fault. You are brilliant, strong, and worthy of love that doesn't come with conditions. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to save you, but maybe someday you'll be strong enough to save yourself. I closed the journal, tears streaming down my face. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Emily's quiet sobbing, and someone, maybe Aunt Teresa, blowing her nose. My mother stood frozen, her face a mask of devastation. When she finally spoke, her voice was broken raw with emotion I'd never heard from her before. You don't understand, she whispered. You don't understand what it's like to be second choice, to know your husband looks at you and wishes you were someone else, to watch him plan to take your children and leave you with nothing. Her voice rose, becoming almost pleading. Your father was going to take you and abandon Emily and me. He was going to destroy this family. Everything I did, the medications, hiding the will, all of it I did to keep us together. I did it to protect Emily from abandonment. I did it because I couldn't let him tear this family apart. So you tore him apart instead, Aunt Teresa said coldly. You destroyed your husband to keep your family intact. Do you hear how insane that sounds, Margaret? I didn't destroy him. He had an accident. Mum's voice broke completely. I just made sure he couldn't abandon us. I made sure Emily wouldn't grow up without a father. Emily grew up with a father who was too drugged to be present, I said quietly. You didn't save anything, Mum. You just created different kinds of damage. Mum sank into her chair, her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, and for the first time in my life, I felt something for her that wasn't anger or hurt or resentment. I felt pity, because she'd sacrificed everything, her integrity, her husband's health, her daughter's well-being out of fear of being alone, and she'd ended up alone anyway. My mother's shoulders shook with sobs that sounded like they were being torn from somewhere deep inside her. When she finally looked up, her face was ravaged. Makeup streaking down her cheeks, all pretense of control gone. "I never meant to hurt him," she said, her voice hoarse. "I swear I never wanted to hurt Robert. I just needed him to stay. Emily needed her father. A child needs both parents. I convinced myself that keeping him here, even if it meant keeping him dependent, was better than letting him leave and destroy our daughter's life." "You convinced yourself of a lot of things," Uncle James said, his voice heavy with disgust. "None of them true." Mum's hands twisted in her lap, desperate gestures that made her look smaller than I'd ever seen her. "The will, I hid the real one because it wasn't fair. Your grandfather never understood. He saw Robert's favoritism as love, as something good. But it destroyed Emily. Every day, watching her sister get all the attention, all the praise, all the validation. And then even in death, Robert's father wanted to give Leah more." Her voice rose again, defensive. "Leah already had everything. She had your father's love, his pride, his time. Emily had nothing but me. Why should Leah get the inheritance too?" "Because grandfather's money was his to distribute however he wanted," Aunt Teresa said sharply. "Not according to your sense of fairness, Margaret. According to his wishes, which you deliberately subverted through fraud. I was protecting my daughter." Mum looked around the room, seeking understanding and finding only judgment. "I was trying to balance the scales that Robert had tipped so far in Leah's favour. Is that so wrong, to want both my children to feel valued by devaluing one of them?" I asked quietly. "Mum, you spent my entire childhood making me feel invisible. You dismissed my achievements, you forgot my events, you made me feel like I only mattered when I made Emily look good by comparison. That wasn't balancing scales, that was revenge. I never—" She stopped, seemed to fold in on herself. "My mother did the same to me. My brother was her favourite. Everything I did she compared to him. Every achievement was nice, but David did it better. I swore I wouldn't do that to my children. I swore I'd make sure both of you felt equally loved." "So you overcompensated," Aunt Teresa said. "You turned Emily into your golden child and Leah into your scapegoat. You didn't break the cycle, Margaret. You just reversed the roles." Mum's face crumpled. "I didn't know how else to do it. When Robert favoured Leah so obviously, I thought if I favoured Emily, at least she'd have someone. At least one parent would see her." Tears streamed freely now. "I was trying to protect her from the pain I felt as a child, from being invisible. I didn't realise I was just inflicting that same pain on Leah instead." The confession hung in the air, raw and honest and utterly inadequate. I felt something shift in my chest, not forgiveness, but understanding. My mother had been broken by her own childhood and had spent decades breaking her daughters in return, convinced she was protecting them. "Your pain doesn't justify what you did," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to choke me. "Understanding where it came from doesn't excuse it. You didn't just neglect me, Mum. You actively worked to diminish me so Emily could feel bigger. You committed fraud to steal my inheritance, and you kept Dad weak and dependent to prevent him from saving me from all of it." "I know." Mum's voice was barely a whisper. "I know what I've done. I've known for years. Every time I looked at you and saw Robert's disappointment reflected back at me, I knew. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let Emily feel what I felt growing up, even if it meant sacrificing you." The brutal honesty of it stole my breath. She'd known. All along she'd known she was hurting me, and she'd done it anyway because in her twisted logic, sacrificing one daughter was worth saving the other. You sacrificed both of us, I said. Emily became entitled and cruel because you taught her she deserved everything without earning it, and I became invisible because you decided one daughter's pain was an acceptable price for the other's happiness. Before Mum could respond, Emily moved. She lurched forward suddenly, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her grip was desperate, her face blotchy and terrified. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please, Leah, don't let them take Mum away. Don't press charges. I'll do anything. I'll make it right. Her voice dissolved into sobs. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. The plan to humiliate you, the blackmail using Mark against you, all of it. I'll confess everything. I'll make it right with Mark. Just please don't send Mum to prison." She was on her knees now, still clutching my hand, looking up at me with the same desperate need for approval she'd probably felt her whole life when looking at her father. "Emily," I said gently, pulling my hand back, "this isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. What Mum did, what you did, there have to be consequences." "But she's our mother." Emily's voice rose to almost a wail. "Please, Leah, you won. You exposed us. Everyone knows the truth now. Isn't that enough?" I looked down at my sister, literally and figuratively at my feet, now begging for mercy she'd never shown me, and felt the weight of the choice in front of me. I had the power now. The evidence, the witnesses, the truth. I could destroy them both if I wanted to. The question was, what did I actually want? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang, cutting through the heavy silence. I glanced at my phone. It was 2:55 p.m. Attorney Morrison had arrived, right on schedule, and everything was about to change again. I looked down at Emily, still on her knees, her face ravaged by tears that looked genuine for perhaps the first time in years. My mother sat collapsed in her chair, broken by her own confessions. And I felt the weight of what my grandfather had said in that video. "You are stronger than they know." This was the test. Not whether I could expose them, I'd already done that, but whether I could wield power without becoming what they had been. "Get up, Emily," I said quietly. When she didn't move, I repeated it more firmly. "Get up." She rose unsteadily, her legs shaking. I stepped back, needing distance between us. "I've been competing with a ghost my whole life," Emily said, her voice raw and broken, in a way I'd never heard before. "Dad died before I could prove I was worth loving, before I could be good enough, smart enough, accomplished enough for him to look at me the way he looked at you." She wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Every time I hurt you, I was trying to hurt the version of you that he loved more than me. The daughter who was worthy. The one who got his time and attention and pride. I was trying to destroy her because I couldn't compete with her." Something in my chest cracked at the honesty of it. "Emily, I wasn't your competition. I was your sister. Dad's failure to see you doesn't mean you had to destroy me." "I know that now." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "But I've spent so long making you pay for his favoritism that I don't know how to be anything else. I don't know who I am without the resentment." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw both the wounded child from the diary and the cruel woman who'd blackmailed Mark and orchestrated my humiliation. Both were real. Both were Emily. And I had to decide which one I believed could change. "I understand your pain," I said, choosing each word carefully. "I really do. Growing up, feeling invisible to Dad, the same way I felt invisible to Mum, I understand that wound. But understanding doesn't mean I'll enable you to keep hurting people. You need to face consequences, Emily. Real ones." The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. I held up a hand, asking whoever was out there to wait one more moment. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, addressing the room but keeping my eyes on Mom and Emily. "I'm not pressing criminal charges against either of you. Yet." I let that word hang in the air. You have 24 hours to make a choice. Option 1. You both accept professional help. Emily, you'll attend therapy for at least a year and provide proof of attendance. Mum, the same. You'll both make public written apologies to this family and to Mark. You'll work with Attorney Morrison to restore grandfather's actual will and correct the probate fraud. And, Emily, you'll make full restitution to Mark for the stolen work, including public acknowledgement and financial compensation. And if we do all that, Mum's voice was hoarse, then I won't pursue criminal charges. The family will know the truth, but you won't face prosecution. I turned to Emily. But option 2 is that you refuse any part of this, and I turn over all evidence to the district attorney. The blackmail, the fraud, all of it. You'll both face felony charges. Emily nodded slowly, seeming to understand the mercy in what I was offering. But before she could speak, Mark stood up. He moved deliberately, his face set with a determination I hadn't seen before. He reached down and pulled the engagement ring from his finger, holding it for a moment before placing it carefully on the table in front of Emily. I can't do this, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. I can't build a future on this foundation. Emily, I hope you find healing. I genuinely do. I hope therapy helps you become the person you could have been without all this pain. He looked at her with something that might have been compassion. But I won't be part of your life anymore. Not as your fiancé, not as your friend. I need to rebuild myself too, and I can't do that while staying connected to the person who nearly destroyed me. Emily stared at the ring on the table like it was a grenade. Mark, please. I'm sorry, he said, and I believed he meant it. But this is over. It has to be. He turned to me then, and I saw in his eyes what I'd been looking for in that park this morning. Genuine remorse, not manipulation. Thank you for being braver than I was, he said simply. Then he walked out of the dining room through the front hall and out of all our lives. The doorbell rang a third time, and I heard the front door open as Mark left. Voices in the hallway, Attorney Morrison's formal tones, and someone else I didn't recognise. That will be the lawyer I told you about, I said to the room. The one with grandfather's real will and all the legal documentation of the fraud. He's here for the official meeting. I checked my phone. It's 3:30 p.m, right on schedule. Attorney Morrison appeared in the doorway, briefcase in hand and professional sympathy on his face. Behind him stood a woman in her 60s dressed in a sharp suit, carrying herself with unmistakable authority. Ms. Cunningham, Morrison said, thank you for being present. I believe you've met most of your family, but allow me to introduce Judge Patricia Cole from the probate court. Given the irregularities that have come to light, she's agreed to be present for this proceeding. A judge. He'd brought a judge to witness everything. My mother's face went even paler, if that was possible. Emily made a small sound of distress, and I understood what my grandfather had done. He hadn't just left me evidence. He'd ensured that when the truth came out, there would be legal authority present to witness it. The judge stepped into the room, her sharp eyes taking in the tear-stained faces, the abandoned engagement ring, the laptop still connected to the TV. I understand there have been some revelations this afternoon, she said calmly. Perhaps someone should tell me exactly what's been happening here. Attorney Morrison stepped fully into the room, his eyes scanning the tear-stained faces and abandoned mimosa glasses, with the practiced assessment of someone who'd seen family drama play out in countless estates. Judge Cole, these are the Cunningham daughters Leah and Emily, and their mother, Margaret Cunningham. The rest are extended family members. Judge Cole nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Mr. Morrison briefed me on the situation with the will. 2 versions submitted to probate claims of a fire that never occurred, missing documentation. Her gaze settled on my mother. But I'm sensing there's more to this story than simple estate fraud. There is, Aunt Teresa said, stepping forward. Your Honour, I'm an attorney myself, recently retired. What's been revealed here today goes beyond probate fraud. Mrs. Cunningham has confessed to interfering with her late husband's medical care to keep him dependent, and her daughter Emily has admitted to blackmail and extortion. She gestured to the laptop still displaying my father's journal entries. There's extensive documentation. Judge Cole's expression hardened slightly. I see. Mr. Morrison, you said you anticipated this. George Cunningham was my friend for over 30 years, Morrison replied. In his final months, he confided his concerns about his daughter-in-law's behaviour. He asked me to ensure that if anything irregular occurred with his will, proper authorities would be present. I took the liberty of inviting you, knowing your long friendship with the family. The judge turned to my mother, who had shrunk into her chair. Mrs. Cunningham, what Mr. Morrison describes and what your sister-in-law has outlined constitutes multiple serious crimes. Probate fraud is a felony. If you did indeed interfere with your husband's medical treatment, as alleged, that could constitute elder abuse, medical battery, or potentially worse, depending on what can be proven. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. However, I understand your granddaughter has proposed an alternative resolution. All eyes turned to me. I pulled out the document I drafted on my laptop this morning after leaving Attorney Morrison's office. I'd hoped I wouldn't need it. I'd hoped that maybe somehow this could be resolved privately. But I'd prepared for this moment anyway. I said, handing copies to Judge Cole and Attorney Morrison. A written agreement that outlines specific terms for accountability and restitution in exchange for me not pursuing criminal prosecution. Judge Cole read through the document, her eyebrows rising slightly. 200 hours of community service for Emily, focused on organisations supporting domestic violence survivors. Mandatory therapy for both Emily and Margaret for a minimum of 12 months with quarterly proof of attendance. Written apologies to affected parties. Margaret to donate 10% of her assets to a family violence charity and step down as executor of the estate. Correction of the probate fraud through proper legal channels. She looked up at me. These are her comprehensive terms, Ms. Cunningham. They're meant to address the harm that's been done while providing a path forward, I said. I don't want revenge. I want accountability. I want my mother and sister to get help for the pain that led them to hurt others. And I want the will corrected to honour my grandfather's actual wishes. And if they refuse these terms, the judge asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Then Attorney Morrison has all the evidence necessary to file criminal complaints with the district attorney, blackmail, extortion, probate fraud, and potentially charges related to medical abuse. I met my mother's eyes. The choice is theirs. Judge Cole turned to my mother and sister. You should understand that Ms. Cunningham is offering you extraordinary leniency. If these matters proceeded through the criminal justice system, you'd both likely face prison time. Probate fraud alone carries a sentence of up to 3 years. Blackmail can be 5 to 10. The court would not look kindly on the manipulation of a vulnerable accident victim's medical care. Emily made a small broken sound. My mother simply stared at her hands. You have until tomorrow at noon to review these terms with your own attorney and decide whether to sign, I continued. If you sign, we move forward with restorative justice. If you refuse, or if you fail to comply with any term once signed, all evidence goes to the DA immediately. This is more than fair, Aunt Teresa said firmly. More than either of you deserve, frankly. Judge Cole folded the document carefully. I'll be available to witness the signing tomorrow if they choose to proceed with the agreement. Mr. Morrison has my contact information. She stood her presence commanding despite her relatively small stature. Mrs. Cunningham, Emily, I strongly suggest you take this offer seriously. Your granddaughter is offering you a chance at redemption. The court system would offer you only punishment. She moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at me. Mr. Morrison, could you give me a moment with Miss Cunningham privately? Morrison nodded, and the judge gestured for me to follow her into the hallway. Once we were alone, her professional demeanour softened slightly. Your grandfather spoke of you often in his final years, she said quietly. He worried about what would happen to you in this family. He said you were stronger than you knew, but that you'd been taught to make yourself small. She placed a gentle hand on my arm. He would be very proud of what you did today, standing up, telling the truth, but still offering mercy where punishment would be easier. My eyes burned with tears. I don't feel strong. I feel exhausted. Strength and exhaustion aren't mutually exclusive, she said with a small smile. But I need you to understand something, Leah. What you've started here today, this is just the beginning. Healing from this level of family dysfunction takes years, not days. Therapy will help them, but it won't magically fix decades of toxic patterns. You've opened the wound to let the infection out. Now comes the long, painful process of actually healing. I know, I whispered. Do you? Her eyes were kind but serious. Because tomorrow, if they sign that agreement, you'll need to hold them accountable to every single term. Therapy, attendance, community service, the apologies, all of it, and there will be times when they slip, when they revert to old patterns, when you'll be tempted to let things slide because you're tired of being the enforcer. You can't, not if you want real change. I nodded, understanding the weight of what she was saying. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning of something much harder than today's confrontation. Thank you, Your Honour, I managed. She squeezed my arm once more. Call me Patricia and Leah. Take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup. She left then, and I stood alone in the hallway, listening to the low murmur of voices from the dining room as my family processed everything that had just happened. Tomorrow at noon, I'd know whether my mother and sister chose healing or prosecution. But right now, I just needed to breathe. I returned to the dining room to find it half empty. Uncle James was helping grandmother to her car. Aunt Teresa was speaking quietly with Attorney Morrison, probably getting copies of documentation for her own records. Cousin Rachel gathered her children quickly, avoiding eye contact with my mother, who still sat frozen at the table. Leah. Aunt Sarah approached me hesitantly. I want you to know, I'd no idea what Emily was planning. When she asked me to attend today and said she might need my support, I thought she just meant moral support for her announcement. I didn't know she wanted me to attack you. I know, I said quietly. She was very good at making people complicit without them realising it. The evening party, Aunt Sarah continued, I assume it's cancelled. I hadn't even thought about it. The formal birthday celebration scheduled for 7 o'clock, with 50 guests invited, a catered dinner, a band, all planned around what was supposed to be Emily's engagement showcase, with my birthday as window dressing. Yes, I said, it's cancelled. Within the hour, my phone started buzzing. First, a text from the caterer, asking if they should still deliver the evening setup, given the circumstances. Apparently word had already reached them. Then, calls from invited guests, their voices careful and uncomfortable, citing sudden conflicts, family emergencies, unexpected work obligations. Nobody wanted to attend a party at the house where such spectacular family implosion had occurred. By 5 o'clock, my phone showed 15 cancellations and counting. I stopped answering and just watched the notifications pile up. The Cunningham family's carefully curated social standing was crumbling in real time. My mother finally moved from her chair and retreated upstairs without a word. Emily followed shortly after, her movements mechanical and defeated. I heard their doors close, the soft click of locks engaging. They were hiding, and I didn't blame them. At 6:30, my mother's phone rang in the kitchen where she'd left it. I glanced at the screen. Janet Morrison, her real estate business partner of 15 years. The call went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, my mother's phone buzzed with a text that I couldn't help but see on the lit screen. Margaret, I've been hearing things from the brunch today. We need to talk about the partnership. This isn't a conversation I want to have over text, but I need to think about my professional reputation. Call me. 20 minutes later, another text. I've spoken with my lawyer. I'm dissolving our partnership effective immediately. I'll send formal paperwork Monday. I'm sorry it's come to this, but I can't be associated with fraud allegations. I hope you understand. I turned the phone face down, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy. My mother had spent decades building her reputation, her business, her carefully constructed image of the perfect family. And in one afternoon, it had all disintegrated. At 7 o'clock, Emily's phone rang. She came downstairs to answer it, her face pale and puffy from crying. Hello, yes, this is Emily Cunningham. A long pause. Monday at 9, can I ask what this is regarding? Another pause and her face went even paler. I understand. Yes, I'll be there. She ended the call and looked at me, her eyes hollow. My company's HR department. They want to meet with me first thing Monday morning about serious workplace conduct allegations. Someone sent them the recordings from today. Probably Mark, I said. He has every right to report the blackmail to your employer. I know. Her voice was barely audible. I know I deserve it. I didn't think it would all happen so fast. But it was happening fast. At 7:30, my phone lit up with a notification from social media. Cousin Rachel had posted something. Sometimes the truth comes out in the most unexpected ways. Grateful for family members who have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's painful. Today reminded me that real strength isn't about maintaining appearances. It's about facing reality. Shach, family, truth, courage, accountability. I watched as the post accumulated likes and shares. Within 30 minutes, it had been shared 50 times, commented on by dozens of people who knew our family. Most comments were supportive, but vague, clearly from people who'd heard rumours, but didn't know specifics. A few were more pointed from relatives who'd been at the brunch. Witnessed something today that changed my entire perspective on family loyalty. Some secrets need to be exposed for healing to begin. Nobody mentioned names, nobody shared details, but everyone who knew the Cunningham family would know exactly what had happened and who was involved. By 9 o'clock, the house had gone completely silent. No calls of support for my mother. No friends stopping by to check on Emily. The doorbell didn't ring. The phone didn't buzz with compassionate messages. Just silence, the deafening kind that comes when a community collectively turns away from people who've violated unspoken codes of decency. I found my mother and Emily sitting together in the darkened living room, the TV off, no lights on, except the glow from the street lamps outside. They weren't talking, just sitting in parallel isolation, processing the reality of what they'd become pariahs in the community they'd worked so hard to impress. The evening party, my mother said without looking at me. How many people cancelled? Everyone, I said simply. All 50 guests. She nodded slowly like she'd expected nothing less. Your grandfather would be pleased. He always said that truth had a way of burning away pretense. He would be pleased that you're facing consequences, I corrected. Not pleased about the pain. There's a difference. Emily pulled her knees to her chest, looking younger than her years. What happens now? After we sign the agreement tomorrow, what happens? You do the work, I said, the therapy, the community service, the apologies. You rebuild yourselves into people who don't hurt others to feel whole. And if we can't? Emily's voice was small. What if I'm too broken to fix? Then you'll face that in therapy. I said not unkindly, but you have to try. That's the agreement. You have to actually try. I left them there in the darkness and went up to my room. Tomorrow at noon, they would sign the agreement or refuse it. Either way, my role in their lives would fundamentally change. I would no longer be the invisible daughter, the scapegoat, the victim of their dysfunction. I would be the person who held them accountable. and I wasn't sure if that was better or just different. At 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed one final time. A text from my mother's number. "We'll sign the agreement. Please, can we talk?" "Just the three of us?" One last time. "Mum." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Tomorrow, after the signing, I'll give you one conversation. Make it count." I turned off my phone and lay in the darkness listening to the house settle around me. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and lawyers and the formal beginning of whatever came next. But tonight, I let myself feel the strange mixture of triumph and grief that came with winning a battle that never should have needed to be fought. Tomorrow, I would be strong again. Tonight, I let myself be tired. The next morning, I woke to find the house eerily quiet. No caterers bustling in the kitchen, no relatives arriving with casseroles and condolences. Just the hollow silence of a family that had imploded and was now trying to figure out how to exist in the aftermath. I spent the day packing methodically folding clothes that had lived in this house for a week that felt like a lifetime. Every item I placed in my suitcase felt like shedding a skin I'd been forced to wear for 36 years. At noon, Attorney Morrison arrived with Judge Cole. The signing took 15 minutes. My mother's hand shook as she wrote her name. Emily cried silently through the entire process, but she signed every page without hesitation. When it was done, Judge Cole witnessed the signatures, made copies for her records, and left with a final warning. "I'll be checking in quarterly. Any violation of these terms and the criminal complaints move forward immediately." After they left, my mother asked if I would stay for dinner. Just the three of us. One last meal before I left for whatever came next. I almost said no, but something in her face, genuine fear of losing me completely, made me agree. "One dinner," I said, "then I'm leaving in the morning." Now, as evening fell, I sat at the dining table that had held 20 people just yesterday. The extra leaves had been removed, the table shrunk back to its smallest size, 3 place settings where there had been dozens. The silence was so heavy it felt like a physical presence. Emily was the first to speak, her voice hoarse from crying. "I don't expect forgiveness. I need to say that first. I don't expect it now. Maybe not ever." She twisted her napkin in her lap. "But I want you to know I signed up for therapy already. Dr. Patricia Chen. She specializes in family trauma and what she called maladaptive coping mechanisms. I start Thursday." "That's good," I said neutrally. I wasn't going to praise her for doing the bare minimum of what she'd agreed to. "And I chose my community service placement," Emily continued. "There's an organization that works with kids from divorced families, kids dealing with parental favoritism and feeling invisible." Her voice cracked. "I thought maybe I could help them avoid becoming what I became. Maybe I could warn them before they turn their pain into weapons." I nodded, acknowledging the appropriateness of the choice without offering absolution. Emily needed to learn that doing the right thing didn't automatically earn applause. My mother had been silent through Emily's speech, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Now she reached beside her chair and brought up 2 manila envelopes, sliding them across the table toward me. "The first one," she said quietly, "contains the signed agreement, your copy. Everything documented, witnessed, legally binding. The quarterly therapy reports will go to Attorney Morrison, who will forward them to you." I opened it, briefly confirmed the signatures and Judge Cole's witness stamp, then set it aside. "The second one," my mother continued, her voice dropping even lower, "contains something I should have given you years ago." She pushed it closer when I didn't immediately take it. "It's the deed to your grandfather's beach house, the one he bought 30 years ago before he married your grandmother. He left it to you separately from the main will outside of probate. He wanted you to have a place that was completely yours, that no one could contest or take away." I opened the envelope slowly and pulled out the deed. The address was on the coast 2 hours north. a small house on a cliff overlooking the ocean. In the property description, to be transferred to Leah Margaret Cunningham upon her 36th birthday as per private trust agreement. You hid this too? I said, not making it a question. I did. My mother didn't try to excuse it. He set it up through a separate attorney, separate from the main estate. I found the paperwork after he died. I was supposed to tell you on your birthday, but She trailed off, unable to articulate why she'd kept one more thing from me. You were going to keep it, I finished for her. Let me think it didn't exist, maybe claim it somehow. I don't know what I was going to do, she admitted. I was angry at him for favouring you even in death, at you for being everything I couldn't be, at myself for becoming someone who would steal from her own daughter. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. But it's yours. It was always supposed to be yours. I held the deed feeling its weight. A house, a place, somewhere that had been meant for me before everything fell apart. This is a start, I said, carefully looking at both of them. Signing the agreement, beginning therapy, returning what you stole. These are starts, but they don't erase what you did. They don't immediately rebuild trust that took decades to destroy. We know, Emily whispered. Do you... I leaned forward slightly. Because I need you to understand something. Forgiveness isn't something you earn in a day, or a month, or even a year. It's something you might earn through consistent change, not grand gestures. I'm leaving tomorrow morning. I'm going to that beach house to figure out who I am outside of this family's dysfunction. And while I'm gone, you're going to do the work you've committed to. The therapy, the community service, the actual changing of patterns that have defined your entire lives. And then, my mother asked, her voice small, after we do the work, then we'll see. I stood the deed and agreement envelopes in my hands. Don't contact me unless it's about the legal agreement or an emergency. If you want a relationship someday, actual relationship, not the toxic dynamic we've had, you'll have to prove you've changed. Not tell me, not promise me. Show me through consistent actions over time. I moved toward the door, ready to return to my room and finish packing. But Emily's voice stopped me. Leah? She sounded so young, so broken. Will you ever be able to look at me and not see the monster I was? I turned back, studying my sister's face. The same face that had smirked while planning my humiliation. The same face that had sobbed while reading that childhood diary. Both versions were real. Both were Emily. I don't know, I said honestly. I hope so. Because the alternative, seeing you as irredeemable, that means I wasted my entire childhood having a sister I couldn't love or trust. I'd like to believe there's someone worth knowing, underneath all the damage we've all done to each other. But you're not sure, Emily said. No, I agreed. I'm not sure. And I won't be sure until you show me who you become when you're not being driven by resentment and fear. That's going to take time. Maybe a lot of time. I'll wait, Emily said, however long it takes. I nodded once and left them sitting at that small table in the dining room where our family had performed togetherness for so many years while falling apart beneath the surface. Tomorrow, I would leave this house for the last time as the invisible daughter. When I came back, if I came back, it would be as something else entirely. I woke at 5:30 before the sun. My bags were already in the car loaded last night after dinner. I dressed quickly and quietly, moving through the dark house, like the ghost I'd always been here. In the kitchen, I wrote a note on the notepad my mother kept by the phone. My handwriting looked steady, certain. I'm not running away. I'm running towards something better. The rest is up to you. Leah. I left it on the kitchen table, where they'd find it propped against the salt shaker. Then, I walked out the front door for the last time, pulling it closed with a soft click that sounded like an ending. The early morning air was cool and clean. I was loading my final box into the trunk when a car pulled up to the curb. Aunt Teresa, still in her pajamas with a coat thrown over them, climbed out with 2 travel mugs of coffee. "I wasn't going to let you leave without saying goodbye," she said, handing me one of the mugs. "Or without telling you that what you did took more courage than I've seen in 30 years of practicing law." "I was terrified the entire time," I admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it." She pulled me into a tight hug. "You did what none of us were brave enough to do. You told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. Your father would be so proud. Your grandfather clearly was." I held on to her for a moment, drawing strength from the first family member who'd truly seen me. "Thank you for witnessing it, for being there." "Where else would I be?" She stepped back, wiping her eyes. "Now go. Build something beautiful. And Leah, don't come back until you're ready. Not when they want you to, but when you're ready. You've spent enough of your life on their timeline." She drove away as the sun began to rise, leaving me alone with my packed car and the open road ahead. I was reaching for my door handle when another car pulled up. Mark's rental. He got out slowly, hands in his pockets, looking uncertain. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he said before I could speak. "Not forgiveness, not another chance. Nothing. I just wanted to say thank you for being braver than I was, for showing me that it was possible to stand up to her." "What will you do now?" I asked. "Start over. Different city, different career. I'm leaving tech, maybe going into teaching. Something where I can help people instead of just building systems." He smiled sadly. "Maybe someday we'll both be the people we should have been, the people we were before everything got so complicated." "Maybe," I agreed. "Take care of yourself, Mark." "You too, Leah. You deserve every good thing that's coming." He walked back to his car and I watched him drive away. 2 people who just briefly mattered to each other now heading in opposite directions. It felt right, clean, like closing a book that had needed to end chapters ago. I climbed into my car, started the engine and pulled away from the curb. I drove through my hometown as the sun rose higher, painting everything in gold light that made familiar places look different. Past the high school where I'd been the quiet girl in the back row. Past the church where my family had sat in the front pew every Sunday, performing perfection for the congregation. Past the coffee shop where Mark and I had first talked, back when I'd thought maybe someone could see me. I didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the town, not at the life I was leaving behind. At the stoplight before the highway entrance, I programmed the address from the deed into my GPS. 237 Coastal Highway, my grandfather's gift. My fresh start. Arriving in 2 hours, the calm voice announced, I merged onto the highway heading north toward the ocean, toward a house I'd never seen, toward a version of myself I'd never been allowed to become. For the first time in 36 years, I was driving toward something instead of away from something, and that made all the difference. The GPS voice announced my arrival just as the road narrowed to a single lane, winding along the cliff edge. On my right, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon. On my left, weathered beach houses stood at irregular intervals, each one a refuge from the world below. Then I saw it. Number 237. A small cottage with grey shingles that had silvered from decades of salt air, white trim that needed paint, and a deck that wrapped around the ocean-facing side. It sat alone on its lot, no close neighbours, just the house and the sea and the sky. Attorney Morrison's car was already parked in the gravel driveway. He stood on the front porch, briefcase in hand, smiling as I pulled up. "Perfect timing," he said as I got out. "I wanted to be here when you saw it for the first time. Your grandfather made me promise." He handed me a set of keys, old brass ones that looked like they had been cut decades ago, and an envelope with my name in my grandfather's handwriting. "Read this first," Morrison said gently. "Then we'll go inside." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letter was dated 3 months before my grandfather died. "My dear Leah," it began, "if you're reading this, you found your way to the house. This place was mine before I married your grandmother, before I became part of the Cunningham family machinery. It's where I came when life got too heavy, when I needed to remember who I was underneath all the expectations. I bought it with money I earned myself, and I kept it separate from everything else, a piece of me that stayed just mine. Now it's yours, not because of the will, not because of inheritance law, but because I know you'll need a place to breathe, a place where no one has defined you, hurt you, or made you smaller to make themselves bigger. Build your life here, Leah. Be free. Be gloriously, unapologetically yourself. You've earned it. All my love, Grandpa George." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Morrison looked away, tactfully, giving me privacy for my grief and gratitude. When I could breathe again, I unlocked the door. The house was small, maybe 1,000 square feet, but full of light. Hardwood floors worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Large windows, facing the ocean, salt-crusted but offering stunning views. A fireplace with a mantel that held nothing but dust and potential. Empty rooms waiting to be filled with whatever life I chose to build. I walked through each space slowly, and instead of seeing what was there, I saw what could be. The living room could hold comfortable couches where women could talk without judgment. The kitchen could be filled with the smell of tea and fresh bread, offering nourishment to people who'd forgotten how to feed themselves. The 2 small bedrooms could become safe spaces for overnight guests who needed to escape, even temporarily, from families that had broken them. I stood on the deck as the sun began to set, painting the ocean in shades of orange and gold. The wind whipped my hair and the salt air filled my lungs, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. Peace. "What will you do with it?" Morrison asked, joining me on the deck. "I'm going to turn it into a retreat centre," I heard myself say. The decision formed as I spoke it, feeling right and inevitable. For women escaping toxic family dynamics. Not a permanent shelter, but a place to breathe. To remember they're more than the roles their families forced on them. Morrison smiled. "Your grandfather would love that. Turning his sanctuary into a sanctuary for others." "Not revenge," I said more to myself than to him. "Purpose." He left me there as darkness fell, promising to send information about zoning and non-profit organisation paperwork. I stayed on that deck for hours, watching stars emerge one by one, making plans and dreaming futures. 6 months, I thought. I'll give myself 6 months to heal, to renovate, to build something real. 6 months later, on a crisp spring morning, I stood in that same spot and watched the first guests arrive. The Cunningham house sign hung by the door. I'd kept my last name, reclaiming it as mine rather than theirs. The rooms were furnished now, warm and welcoming. I'd hired a therapist to hold weekly sessions. I'd connected with women's organisations throughout the state. I was greeting the third arrival when a car I recognised pulled into the driveway. Emily got out slowly, carrying a small overnight bag, her face nervous and hopeful. "I called ahead," she said quietly. "They said there was space. I've been in therapy for 6 months, completed my community service, but She swallowed hard. "I need help too. Not just the therapy I was required to do, real help. And I thought maybe you'd understand what I need better than anyone." I looked at my sister, thinner, softer, somehow carrying herself differently than before, and I had to decide right then whether to let her in. I studied Emily's face, looking for signs of the sister who'd orchestrated my humiliation. The entitled smile, the calculating eyes, the subtle sense that she was already 3 steps ahead in a game I didn't know we were playing. But I didn't see any of that. What I saw was exhaustion, genuine humility, and something that looked like fear, not of me, but of herself, of who she'd been and what she was capable of becoming again. "Come inside," I said finally. "We need to talk." I led her to my office, a small room off the main living area that I'd furnished simply with a desk, 2 chairs and windows overlooking the ocean. Emily sat without being invited, her overnight bag at her feet, her hands folded in her lap. "Show me the documentation," I said. "Therapy completion, community service verification, everything." She pulled out a folder and handed it to me without hesitation. Inside were certificates from Dr. Patricia Chen, confirming 12 months of weekly therapy sessions, attendance records showing 0 missed appointments, and a letter from the Children's Services Organisation documenting 200 hours of completed community service. There was also something I hadn't requested: a letter from Dr. Chen herself. "Ms. Cunningham has done significant work in our time together," the letter read. "She has confronted painful truths about herself and her family with courage and honesty. While healing is ongoing and will continue to require effort, I believe she has made genuine progress in understanding and changing maladaptive patterns. She has my full support in her efforts to rebuild relationships with appropriate boundaries." "I didn't ask her to write that," Emily said quietly. "But I thought you'd want to know from someone objective whether I was actually changing or just performing change." I set the folder aside. "Why here, Emily? There are hundreds of places you could volunteer. Why come to the one place where your past is so present?" "Because hiding from it doesn't work." She met my eyes directly. "I tried that for the first 3 months, different volunteer opportunities, different causes, but I kept feeling like I was running away from accountability instead of running toward growth." She took a shaky breath. "The women who come here, they're dealing with the same kind of family trauma we grew up with. I understand what they're feeling because I've felt it, and because I've inflicted it. Maybe that understanding could help them, and maybe helping them could help me become someone worth being. Or maybe," I said carefully, "you're looking for forgiveness and think this is the shortcut to earning it." Emily nodded slowly. "My therapist said you'd probably think that, and she said if that was my primary motivation, I shouldn't come. But if I genuinely wanted to serve others and was willing to do it without expectation of reward or reconciliation, then maybe it was worth trying." She looked down at her hands. "I'm not here to ask to be your sister again, Leah. I'm here to ask if I can volunteer. I want to learn how to help people instead of hurt them." I stood and walked to the window, watching waves crash against the rocks below. This was the test my grandfather had talked about. Not whether I could expose Emily's cruelty, but whether I could recognise genuine change when it appeared, and whether I could maintain boundaries while still offering grace. "You can volunteer," I said, turning back to her, "but there are conditions, non-negotiable ones." "Okay," Emily's voice was steady. "You'll start with the hardest jobs: cleaning bathrooms, yard work, kitchen prep, administrative tasks like filing and data entry. You won't skip to the meaningful work facilitating groups, counselling guests, anything that puts you in a position of authority or trust. You'll earn those opportunities over time if you prove yourself." "I understand." "If you slip back into old patterns, manipulation, entitlement, making yourself the centre of attention, you're gone immediately. No second chances here, Emily. This place is too important to risk on someone who isn't genuinely committed to change." "I know." She stood meeting my eyes. "I don't deserve easy. I don't deserve shortcuts. I don't even deserve this chance, probably, but thank you for giving it to me anyway." Over the following weeks, I watched Emily with the wariness of someone who'd been burned too many times to trust easily. But slowly, incrementally, she began to prove herself. She showed up at 6 every morning to help with breakfast prep, chopping vegetables, with hands that had once been manicured but were now rough from work. She scrubbed bathrooms without complaint. She pulled weeds in the garden until her back ached. When guests asked her questions, she directed them to staff members instead of inserting herself into their healing process. One evening, I found her sitting alone on the back porch, crying quietly. When she noticed me, she quickly wiped her eyes. "One of the guests today," she said. "She was talking about her sister. How her sister got everything growing up while she got nothing. How much she resented that sister, how that resentment poisoned everything. Emily's voice broke. I saw myself, the person I was, and I understood for the first time how much damage I did because I couldn't see past my own pain. I sat down beside her, not touching but present. That's growth, I said quietly. Seeing yourself clearly. It's painful, but it's necessary. Will it always hurt this much? She asked. Probably less over time, I said. But yes, I think accountability does hurt. It should. That's how we know we're feeling it for real. 3 months after Emily arrived, I was reviewing grant applications in my office when my email chimed. The subject line made my stomach clench, an old woman's request. The sender was Mum. I stared at that unopened email for a long time, my finger hovering over the delete button. Emily had proven she could change, but that didn't mean I was ready to face what came next. Finally, I clicked it open. The email was shorter than I expected. No long explanations, no elaborate justifications, just simple, direct words from a woman who'd finally learned that less could be more. Leah, I've completed the required steps from the agreement. 12 months of therapy with Dr. Richardson, the donation to the family violence charity, the public apology to the extended family, which was the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm not asking to be forgiven. I know I don't deserve it. But if you ever want to talk, I'm here. I'm learning that being a mother means putting my children's needs above my fears. I should have learned that 36 years ago. I'm sorry I didn't. Margaret. Not Mum, Margaret. She'd signed it with her first name, acknowledging perhaps that she'd lost the right to that title until I chose to give it back. I closed the laptop and walked down to the beach, my father's letter in my hand. I'd kept it in a memory box on my desk, taking it out when I needed to remember where I came from and why this work mattered. I sat on the sand and read his words again in the fading afternoon light. If I couldn't teach you about strength, then life will. And I believe you'll learn. I did learn, Dad, I whispered to the wind. It just took me 36 years and almost destroying myself to do it. I folded the letter carefully and held it against my chest, letting myself feel the grief and gratitude simultaneously. My father had tried to save me and failed, but his failure had taught me that salvation had to come from within. No one could rescue me. I'd had to rescue myself. When I walked back to the house, Emily was in the garden, pruning roses in the last light of day. She looked up and waved, then returned to her work without seeking conversation or validation. 3 months ago, she would have followed me asking if I was okay, inserting herself into my moment. Now she'd learned to give space, to let others have their feelings without making them about her. Small changes, but real ones. I went to my office and looked at Mom's email again. My finger hovered over the reply button. I could write back. I could acknowledge her effort. I could open the door to conversation. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Instead of replying, I created a folder labeled Someday and moved the email there. Not deleted, not ignored. Just held for when I was ready. Someday, I said aloud. But not today. Today, I choose peace. Through the window, I watched 3 women arrive for the evening session, a mother escaping her daughter's emotional abuse, a sister betrayed by sibling rivalry, a daughter finally leaving her narcissistic father's house. I knew their stories because I'd lived variations of them, and I knew what they needed because I'd needed it too. I met them at the door with warm tea and genuine smiles. Welcome to Cunningham House. You're safe here. You're seen here, and whatever brought you to this door, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. As they settled into the living room, sharing their stories in halting voices, I felt that familiar sense of purpose that had replaced the anger I'd carried for so long. This was my answer to the pain, not revenge, not bitterness, but transformation. Taking what had broken me and using it to help others find their own strength. Later that night, I stood on my bedroom deck, watching the moon rise over the ocean. Behind me through the window, I could see Emily in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. On my phone, Mum's email sat in its folder waiting for a someday that might come, or might not. I thought about my grandfather's words, "Build your life here, be free." I'd built something, not just a house or a retreat centre, but a life that was entirely mine. Defined by my choices, my values, my capacity for both justice and mercy. I'd spent 36 years being the silent sister, the one who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction so they could feel whole. But I'd learned that silence isn't strength. It's just fear wearing a polite mask. When I finally spoke my truth, I didn't just free myself. I opened a door for others to walk through too. Healing wasn't a destination I'd arrived at. It was a path I chose every single day. Some days that meant working with guests. Some days it meant watching Emily prove herself through action. Some days it meant leaving Mum's email unopened, because I wasn't ready yet, and that was okay. The waves crashed below, constant and cleansing. Tomorrow would bring new guests, new stories, new opportunities to help others find their voices. Emily would wake early and make breakfast. Mum's email would still be waiting in its folder, and I would choose once again to keep walking forward. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. A new day, another choice, another step on the path. I chose healing. I chose peace. I chose myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. And that's where Leah's story ends, or perhaps more accurately, where her new story truly begins. Standing on that beach at sunrise, having transformed her pain into purpose, she'd finally become the woman her grandfather always believed she could be. Not perfect, not healed completely, but free. Free from the need to be invisible. Free from the weight of other people's dysfunction. Free to choose her own path on her own timeline, with boundaries that protected rather than imprisoned her. What struck me most about this story wasn't the dramatic confrontation or the satisfying moment when the truth came out. It was what came after. Because Leah didn't just expose her family's toxicity and walk away in triumph. She built something. She took the inheritance her grandfather left her and created a space where other women could find the strength she'd had to discover alone. That's the difference between revenge and healing. Revenge is about making others hurt the way you've hurt. Healing is about ensuring others don't have to hurt the way you did. Think about the courage it took for Leah to stand up in that dining room in front of 20 people who'd known her entire life as the quiet, invisible daughter and reveal everything. The blackmail, the fraud, the medical manipulation, the decades of systematic erasure. She knew that once she opened that laptop and pressed play, there was no going back. Her family would never be the same. But she did it anyway, because silence had been slowly killing her for 36 years, and speaking up, even when her voice shook, was the only way to save herself. And here's what I love about how this story ends. Leah doesn't give us a neat, tied up with a bow conclusion. Emily is working at the retreat centre showing genuine change, but Leah hasn't declared her forgiven. There's no tearful reconciliation scene where they hug and promise to be the sisters they never were. Instead, Leah watches. She observes. She holds Emily accountable to the standards she set. She allows for the possibility of redemption while refusing to guarantee it. That's real strength. Not the kind that comes from being hard and unforgiving, but the kind that comes from being boundaried and honest. And that email from her mother sitting unopened in a folder labelled "Someday." That's the moment that really gets me. Because Leah could have deleted it. She could have responded immediately. But instead, she chose the third option we so rarely give ourselves permission to take. She chose to wait until she was ready. Not until her mother needed closure. Not until society deemed it appropriate to forgive. But until Leah herself felt prepared to engage with that relationship again, if ever. She put her own healing first, and that's revolutionary in a world that constantly tells us, especially women, especially daughters, that we owe our parents access to us, regardless of how they've treated us. I want you to think about your own life for a moment. Are there relationships where you've been the invisible one, where someone else's light was allowed to shine so bright that you disappeared into the shadows? Are there people who've asked you to be smaller so they could feel bigger? Families that function on the unspoken agreement that certain truths will never be spoken aloud? If so, Leah's story is for you, not because you need to have a dramatic confrontation, not because you need to expose anyone or seek revenge, but because you need to know that speaking your truth, setting your boundaries and choosing your own healing over other people's comfort is not selfish, it's survival. Leah's grandfather told her that truth is a weapon, and it is. But it's also a tool, a key, a door that opens onto possibilities you can't see from inside the prison of silence. When Leah finally used her truth, she didn't just escape. She created something beautiful. She turned a beach house into a sanctuary. She transformed her trauma into a calling. She proved that you can break cycles, set boundaries, demand accountability, and still leave room for grace. Not cheap grace that costs nothing, but expensive grace. The kind that says, I will give you the opportunity to change, but I won't sacrifice myself while you figure out if you want to take it. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. And you don't have to stay silent to keep the peace. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and even for the people who've hurt you, is to stop pretending everything is fine when it isn't. To stop making yourself small so others can feel big. Leah spent 36 years being invisible, and then she decided to be seen. Yes, it was messy. Yes, it was painful. Yes, it cost her the illusion of family harmony she'd never actually had. But it gave her something infinitely more valuable. It gave her herself. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the invisible one in your family? Have you experienced the kind of systematic favoritism that Leah and Emily both suffered under? What would you have done in Leah's position? And here's the big question. What do you think about Leah leaving her mother's email unopened? Was that wisdom or avoidance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, if you saw yourself in Leah or even in Emily, hit that subscribe button. I share stories like this one, stories about real people dealing with real family dynamics, finding real courage in impossible situations every single week. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, be gentle with yourself. If you're on your own healing journey, if you're learning to set boundaries or speak truth or choose peace, you're doing the hard work. And I'm proud of you. Until next time, remember that your story matters, your voice matters, and you deserve to take up space in your own life. Keep walking forward. I'll see you in the next one.